The stolen gown was 2 sizes too big. Esme had pinned it at the waist with a borrowed brooch and prayed the seams would hold. The gold fabric pooled slightly at her feet, and every time she took a step, she had to lift the hem just enough to keep from tripping. She had practiced walking in it for 3 hours that afternoon in the narrow space between the 2 cots in her elder's house, stepping heel to toe, until the motion felt natural enough that nobody would notice she was pretending. Nobody could notice. Tonight, everything depended on nobody noticing anything at all. The carriage she had taken, a public one, hired with the last coins her elder had pressed into her hand, dropped her at the outer edge of the palace grounds with a dozen other passengers. Some of them were clearly nobles, their gowns proper and their posture easy, the way people carry themselves when they have never once had to think about whether they belong somewhere. Others were merchants who had bought invitations, their clothes fine but their eyes darting, still calculating. Esme fell in step with a group of 4 women who were laughing at something one of them had said, and she simply walked with them through the outer gate without making eye contact with the guards. It worked because she looked like she was with someone. She was not with anyone. The gate behind her was 30 feet of iron and torchlight, and as she passed through it, she felt the cold evening air shift into something warmer, heavier, the breath of 3,000 candles burning inside the palace walls. The grounds beyond the gate were lit with lanterns strung between stone pillars, and people moved along the gravel paths in every direction, their masks catching the light and throwing it back in pieces of gold and silver and deep blue. Esme reached into the small bag she had hidden beneath her outer shawl and pulled out her own mask. It was the one thing she had not borrowed. She had made it herself, 3 nights ago, working by the light of a single candle while her elder slept. She had taken a plain white base, the kind sold in market stalls for children's festivals, and covered it with gold paint that she had mixed from powder and oil. She had pressed small glass beads along the upper edges where the eyebrows would be, and she had attached a thin strip of silk ribbon at each side to tie it in place. It was not the work of a craftsman, but in candlelight, with the noise and the motion of a crowd all around her, it would pass. She tied it over her eyes and stepped onto the main path. The palace itself was enormous. Esme had seen it from a distance before, from the ridge above the valley where her pack's land began, or where it used to begin, before the boundary lines were redrawn, and the territory shrank, and the elders stopped talking about the future with any confidence. From the ridge, the palace looked like a drawing in a book, something that existed in stories. Up close, with its stone towers rising above the tree line and its long rows of lit windows casting pale rectangles of light onto the courtyard below, it felt less like a building, and more like a statement. It said, "We have always been here. We will always be here. And you are very, very small." She kept walking. The letter was tucked against the inside of her bodice, pressed between the fabric and her skin, sealed with dark wax that her elder had pressed with a ring he had worn for 40 years. She could feel the edge of it with every breath she took, not sharp, exactly, but present, a reminder. The whole reason she was here, in a stolen gown and a homemade mask, walking through a palace gate as though she had every right to. The elder's name was Gideon Cole. He was 73 years old and had not left his bed in 6 weeks. When Esme had come to see him that morning, he had been sitting up against his pillows with more effort than his body should have had to spend on such a simple thing, and he had taken her hand in both of his and held it for a long moment before he spoke. "The petition has been denied twice," he said, "through the official channels. They do not even bother to read them fully before they return them." "I know," Esme said. "There is one way left." He had looked at her steadily. "Tonight is the masquerade. Every invitation is sealed with the crown seal, which means every door of the palace is open to anyone who carries one. The king will be there. His court will be there. If the letter reaches him directly, hand-delivered, not filtered through his stewards or his council, it has a chance. A real chance." Esme had looked at the sealed letter on the table beside his bed. "You want me to go? You are the fastest thinker we have left," he said simply, "and you are not afraid of the right things." She had not asked what the wrong things were. She suspected she already knew, the things that should make a sensible person turn around and go home, the things that made a person think twice about walking into the most powerful building in the territory, wearing a borrowed dress and a painted mask. She had taken the letter, and she had started walking. Inside the palace, the noise was immediate, not chaotic, controlled, the way all very expensive things are controlled, but loud in the particular way of rooms that have high ceilings and 100 conversations happening at once. The grand hall where the ball was being held ran the entire length of the east wing. The floor was white marble with gray veins running through it like rivers seen from very high up. Chandeliers hung above the crowd in rows, each one carrying hundreds of candles, and the light they produced was warm and golden, and made everyone underneath them look like they were important. The guests were dressed in every color Esme could name, and some she could not. Women in deep red with masks shaped like roses. Men in midnight blue with silver buttons running from collar to cuff. A pair of older women near the doorway, wearing matching green gowns and matching expressions of mild disapproval at everything around them. A young man with a coat that appeared to have been made entirely of black feathers, who was standing with a glass of something pale in his hand and talking very quickly to someone who did not look at all interested. Esme moved along the edge of the room, keeping her back near the wall, watching. She had one task: deliver the letter to the king, or as close to the king as she could reach. If she could get it into the hands of a senior steward, someone who moved in and out of the king's immediate circle, that would be enough. Gideon had given her 3 names, men he had known years ago, whose loyalties he still believed ran deep enough to do the right thing with a letter from an old pack elder. The first name was a man called Philip Ash. Gideon had said he was tall, with gray at his temples, and that he had a habit of standing near doors rather than in the center of rooms, because he liked to see everything without being in the middle of it. Esme scanned the edges of the hall for exactly that type. She found him in 10 minutes. He was standing near a set of tall windows on the north wall, with a cup in his hand and his eyes moving slowly across the room in the unhurried way of someone who has spent many years watching people. He was exactly as Gideon had described: tall, gray-templed, watchful. He wore a simple dark coat and a half-mask that he had clearly pushed up off his eyes and onto his forehead without thinking about it, which meant he was comfortable enough here that he did not feel he needed to hide. Esme crossed the room toward him. She kept her pace steady. She did not rush. She did not look at her feet. When she was close enough, she stopped beside him and turned to look at the room the way he was looking at it, as though they were simply 2 people watching the same dance floor. "Philip Ash," she said quietly, not looking at him. He turned his head just slightly. "You have the advantage of me," he said. His voice was measured. "I am no one important," she said, "but I carry something from someone who was." She reached into the small concealed pocket she had sewn into the inner side of her skirt and withdrew the sealed letter. She held it at her side, low, not drawing attention. "Gideon Cole's name is on the seal. He asked that it reach the king directly, or as close to directly as can be managed." Philip Ash was quiet for a moment. He looked at the letter without reaching for it. "Gideon Cole," he said, not a question, a recollection. "He is not well," Esme said. "He cannot come himself. He sent me instead." Philip looked at her then. He studied her with the particular attention of someone who has learned to read things quickly and trust what he reads. Whatever he found in her face, after a long moment, he seemed to decide it was enough. He took the letter. He did not put it away immediately. He turned it over in his hands, looked at the seal, and then folded his fingers around it. "It will reach him tonight," he said. "Thank you," Esme said. She meant it in a way that her voice could not fully carry. She turned and moved back into the crowd. The task was done. She stood in the middle of the grand hall, surrounded by 3,000 candles and 2,000 people, and realized that the carriage she had come in would not return for another hour and 40 minutes. She had checked the schedule twice before she left. The last pickup at the palace gates was at the quarter hour before midnight, and it was not yet 11. She should find a quiet corner. She should stand still, take up no space, attract no attention, and wait. She moved toward the far end of the hall where the crowd was thinner, and that was when she felt it. She could not explain it then, and she would spend a long time afterward trying. It was not a sound. It was not a touch. It was not the result of anything she could see. It was more like a shift in the air, the way the atmosphere in a room changes when someone walks into it who changes the atmosphere of rooms. Like the moment before a storm, when the sky looks exactly the same as it always does, but something underneath your skin knows it won't stay that way. Esme stopped walking. She did not know why she stopped. She looked around her. The crowd was the same crowd it had been 30 seconds ago. The music was the same music. The candles had not moved. But something had changed. She pressed her thumb against the place where the letter had been, the inside of her bodice, now empty, and held it there for a moment. Then she kept walking. She found a place near the far wall where a wide stone window ledge jutted out low enough to perch on, and she sat, and she watched the room, and she did what she had told herself she would do while she waited. Nothing at all. She watched the dancers. She watched the conversations at the edges. She watched the way people behaved differently depending on who was standing next to them. Relaxed with friends, careful with strangers, performing with anyone they were trying to impress. She watched a young woman drop her fan and watched the man beside her pick it up for her, and the small private smile that passed between them that they thought no one else could see. She watched the doors at the far end of the hall. They were the grandest doors she had ever seen, twice the height of any door she had known in her life. Dark wood, carved with patterns that she was too far away to read clearly but that she knew, because Gideon had told her once, years ago, when she was young enough to think this kind of detail mattered, were not decorative. They were records. Every significant moment in the kingdom's history, carved in wood, beginning at the bottom and working their way up to the top in order of occurrence. The most recent events were at eye level. The oldest ones were so high above your head that you needed a ladder to read them. Those doors opened at exactly 15 minutes past 11. Esme knew the precise time because she had been watching the clock on the east wall, the one with gold hands and a face so large that it could be read from anywhere in the hall. The doors opened, and a man walked through them. She knew immediately who he was. Not because anyone announced him, though a moment later, someone did. A formal statement that moved through the crowd like a wave, bowing it slightly as it passed. She knew because of the way the room changed when he entered it. King Aldrich of the Northern Reaches. He was not what she had expected. She had built a picture of him over the years from pieces, from the things Gideon said, from the decrees that arrived by messenger, from the way people spoke his name when they thought they were being careful, and the way they spoke it when they thought no one was listening. From all of that, she had assembled something cold and geometric, a man shaped like a symbol. He was not shaped like a symbol. He was tall, but not unreasonably so. He wore dark clothes, formal, correct, not showy, and a mask that covered only the upper half of his face, dark leather edged in silver, that he wore the way people wear things they have been told to wear and have made their peace with. His face below the mask was angular and still, not angry, not warm. Still, the way deep water is still, like the surface was calm because everything significant was happening somewhere below it. He moved through the parted crowd with the kind of ease that comes not from arrogance but from genuine indifference to being watched. He was not performing for the room, he was simply in it. And he was looking at something. Esme followed his line of sight for a moment before she understood that she could not find what he was looking at. The crowd between them was thick enough that his gaze, wherever it was directed, disappeared into it before she could trace it to its destination. She turned back and looked at him instead. She knew she should not. She pressed her thumb against the empty place inside her bodice where the letter had been, and she told herself she was only looking because this was the man the letter had gone to. Because what happened next, to Gideon, to the 40 people left in their pack, to the land that had been theirs and was shrinking, depended in some real way on this man and what he decided. That was the reason she was looking. That was the only reason. The clock on the east wall read 11:22, 38 minutes until the last carriage. She sat on the stone ledge and she did not look away. Far across the room, the king's head turned slightly. He spoke to someone at his side, some word or two, and then his attention moved, and Esme had the sudden, strange, deeply irrational sense that the thing he had been looking for before, the thing his gaze had been tracing through the crowd, had just found him instead. She pulled her mask a little higher. She pressed her feet flat against the floor. She breathed. The clock moved. She did not leave. Aldrich did not want to be at the ball. This was not a new feeling. He had not wanted to attend the previous one either, or the one before that, and if he were being precise about it, he could trace the exact moment in his life when these events had shifted from tolerable to something he had to move through the way you move through cold water, steadily, without slowing down, keeping your breathing controlled. That moment was 11 years ago. He did not think about the moment tonight, because he had learned a long time ago that thinking about it accomplished nothing useful, and cost more than he had available to spend on things that accomplished nothing useful. He was the king. The kingdom required him to be at the ball. He was at the ball. These were the facts, and he arranged himself inside them as neatly as he could manage. His advisor, a careful and long-suffering man named Oliver Grant, was beside him as always, speaking in the low, continuous murmur that Aldrich had learned over 8 years of working together meant, "There are things you need to know, and I am going to tell them to you in the least disruptive way possible. The delegation from the Western Trade Council is in the third row of tables on your left," Oliver said, matching his pace to the king's as they moved along the edge of the hall. "The Lord from Dunmore has been asking for a direct conversation all evening, and the petition from the Colford pack was received an hour ago through one of the stewards. Philip Ash has it. I will read it in the morning," Aldrich said. "Philip suggested it may warrant your attention sooner than in the morning, Oliver." Oliver paused for half a step, which was his way of registering objection without actually registering it. Then he continued as though the pause had not happened. "The Eastern Musical Guild has arranged the program for the evening in 3 movements. You are expected to open the 3rd movement by taking the first dance of that set, which begins at midnight. I know. You do not dance at these events. I know that too. Oliver did not respond to this. He had learned which of Aldrich's statements were openings for conversation, and which were the closing of one. This was the second kind. They completed a slow circuit of the outer edge of the hall, which was what Aldrich did at these events instead of standing in one place and allowing himself to become a fixed point around which other people orbited. Movement was easier. It gave him a task. It also meant that anyone who wanted to speak with him had to intercept him rather than approach. And most people, even powerful ones, even people with legitimate things to say, found interception harder than approach and gave up before they tried. The Dunmore Lord would not give up. He had already shifted his position twice across the hall, tracking Aldrich's path. Aldrich had noticed this, which meant he would eventually need to stop and have the conversation, or the Lord would follow him for the rest of the evening, which was worse. He was calculating when to stop and how briefly when something happened. He did not know, afterward, how to explain it clearly. The honest answer was that he felt it before anything happened at all, before he turned his head, before he saw anything that could have caused it. His wolf, which had been the quietest part of him for 11 years, the part that had learned to expect nothing and therefore stopped asking for anything, simply lifted its head. That was all. It did not make a sound. It did not move in the way it used to when he was younger, insistent, restless, turning over everything in search of what it needed. It just lifted its head the way a sleeping animal lifts its head when it hears a sound that the human ears in the same room have not registered yet. Aldrich kept walking, but his eyes moved across the room in a slow, quiet scan that had nothing to do with checking the position of the Dunmore Lord. The hall was full, anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people, and his staff would have an exact count by morning, but right now they were a moving mass of color and candlelight, and the kind of calculated joy that people perform at formal events. He moved his gaze through them methodically, the way he read documents, from left to right, section by section, not looking for anything specific because he did not know what he was looking for. He reached the far end of the hall. The far end was quieter. The stone window ledge was a known resting point. His household staff sometimes left a tray of water glasses there, because experience had taught them that guests who needed a moment found it on their own without being directed, and it was better to have the moment be comfortable. A handful of people were sitting along it now. A woman with a feathered hat talking to a man who was clearly her husband, a young man who had the posture of someone who had been on his feet too long, and someone at the far end, a woman in gold, sitting very still, watching the room. Aldrich's stride did not change. His expression did not change. But his wolf, quietly, put its feet down. He kept moving. He circled back along the north wall. He stopped for exactly 4.5 minutes with the Dunmore Lord, said what needed to be said, extracted himself. He accepted a glass of water from a passing server and drank half of it and set the rest on a table without thinking about it. Oliver told him something about the third movement of the musical program. He nodded at the appropriate time. He was aware, with the part of his mind that he could not quiet, that he was keeping track of the far end of the hall. The woman in gold was still there, still sitting still. He took a longer route on his next circuit. When he was close enough to see more clearly, he kept his attention on the people near her, not on her directly, because looking directly at something you were not sure about tended to change the thing before you understood it. He read the edges, the way she sat, not relaxed, not tense, the way her hands were in her lap without fidgeting, the way her eyes moved across the room in measured intervals, not darting, not dreamy, watching in the particular way of someone who was used to needing information. She was wearing a mask, gold, with small beads along the upper edge. It sat slightly too high on her face, which meant it had been made for someone else, or made by someone who had not measured it correctly. She had tied it carefully. He could see the ribbon was doubled at the side, which people only did when they were worried the knot would not hold. The gown was wrong for her. He could tell by the way she moved within it. A small adjustment at the hem when she shifted her position. Too long. She had managed it so well that no one passing would notice, but the management itself was visible to someone paying attention. She was not who she was dressed to be. That, in itself, was not unusual. Half the room was dressed to be someone they were not, and most of them were doing it far less gracefully. What was unusual was the steadiness of her. Aldrich had spent most of his adult life in rooms full of people, and had become, out of necessity, reasonably good at reading them. The woman at the far end of the ledge was doing something that very few people could do in a place like this. She was genuinely not performing. She was not trying to be seen, and she was not trying to be invisible. She was simply present in the uncluttered way of someone who had a task and had done it and was now waiting. He looked away. He went and stood near the east windows and spoke with two of his council members about something that his mouth managed without requiring much from his mind. He finished the conversation in 6 minutes. Oliver appeared at his elbow. The third movement begins in 40 minutes, Oliver said. Yes. A pause. The letter from the Colford pack, Oliver said. His voice was slightly quieter than usual. Philip did mention, the elder's name is Gideon Cole. You may remember the Cole family. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. I know who Gideon Cole is. He's not well, apparently. The petition. I said I would read it in the morning. Of course. Oliver knew what that tone meant. Aldrich turned and looked back across the room. The woman in gold was no longer on the ledge. He found her without meaning to, or rather, without being fully aware that he was looking. A moment later, near the center of the room, standing at the edge of the space where the dancers moved, watching them. She was not watching the way people watch when they want to be invited to join. She was watching the way people watch when they find something genuinely interesting and want to understand it. She was close enough now that he could see the set of her jaw and the way she stood. Weight slightly more on her left foot, chin a degree or two upward, arms easy at her sides. He read all of this in the time it took to blink. Oliver said something. Excuse me a moment, Aldrich said. Oliver had been his advisor long enough to know the difference between a king taking a moment and a king taking a direction. He did not follow. Aldrich moved through the crowd with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. People stepped aside without being asked, not because they saw him coming necessarily, but because there was something in the way he moved that suggested the space would be easier for everyone if they made room. He was not thinking about this. He was thinking about something else, which was unusual for him. He was not a man who let his thoughts go ahead of his actions. He stopped about 4 feet from her. She was watching a particular pair of dancers, an older man and a younger woman, clearly not related, clearly not romantic, moving through a formal court step with the practiced ease of 2 people who had done this many times and trusted each other. There was something beautiful about it, actually. The efficiency of long practice, the way they did not have to think about where the other person's feet would be. He was looking at her, looking at them. They have danced together since she was 14, he said. The woman in gold went very still. She did not spin around. She turned, measured. The way you turn when you want to seem unhurried but your heart is doing something complicated. Her eyes found his and stayed there for exactly the length of time it took to make a decision. His wife and her father were friends, she said. She grew up treating him like an uncle. Aldrich looked at her. How do you know that? I don't, she said. But it looks like that, doesn't it? He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at the dancers. Yes, he said. It does. The music shifted into the second section of the current piece. Slower, more deliberate. The dancers adjusted their hold on each other and continued without missing a step. You are not from the court, he said, not accusing, observing. Does that disqualify me from attending a masquerade? She said. No, he said. This one is open to the city. I am simply stating what I see. And what you see. She glanced at him, and there was something in the glance that was measuring him in exactly the way he had just been measuring the room, is apparently worth commenting on. Most things worth seeing are worth commenting on. Not at court, she said. Usually the things worth seeing are the things most carefully not commented on. He was quiet for a moment. You have been to court before. I have heard things, she said. That was not quite an answer. He noticed that she had noticed that he noticed, and that she did not move to fill the silence with explanation. He found himself adjusting a small internal assessment without quite meaning to. Are you enjoying the evening? He asked. I have been watching the room, she said, the same as you. He looked at her. How do you know what I have been doing? She looked directly at him. Behind the gold mask, her eyes were dark and steady. Because you have done 2 full circuits and spoken to exactly 3 people, and you have spent most of the time looking at things rather than talking to them. That is not enjoying an evening. That is managing one. The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms when someone has said something precisely accurate. Aldrich said nothing for a moment. You are honest, he said finally. Only when it is not dangerous, she said. And tonight it is not dangerous? She glanced at him, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved in her eyes that was not as settled as the rest of her. Tonight, she said, I am no one. No one can be as honest as she likes. The clock on the east wall moved to 11:43. 17 minutes. The last carriage. She had not moved. Aldrich looked at the dancers again, and then back at her, and he said something that surprised him, because he had not planned to say it. Would you like to see the East Gallery? There are paintings of the old council that are more interesting than anything happening in this room. She looked at him for a long moment. I know who you are, she said quietly. I know, he said. She was quiet. "The invitation is not about who I am," he said. "It is about the paintings, which are genuinely good." She looked at the clock. She pressed something, he could not see what, against her side for a moment. A small habitual gesture, the kind people make when checking that something is still where they left it. "I cannot stay long," she said. He did not tell her that she did not have to. He simply turned toward the east corridor, and after a moment that lasted long enough for him to wonder if he had misjudged everything, she fell into step beside him. The music faded behind them as they walked out of the hall. Oliver watched them go. He did not follow. He entered the east gallery at 11:51 by the clock in the outer corridor. He had not looked at the clock when he turned toward it. He noted the time automatically, the way people who have learned to track time as a professional tool do it without choosing to. The woman in gold was looking at the second king. He stopped at the entrance and did not announce himself, which was unusual for him. He generally did announce himself, in small ways, because walking up behind someone without warning in a quiet corridor was not something he wanted to do. But she was absorbed enough in the portrait that she had not heard him come in, and he stood for a moment in the entrance and watched her look at the painting, and it was strange how much information could be read from the back of a person who was simply standing and thinking. She had a particular quality of attention. He noticed this. The way she stood was the way people stand when they are not performing looking but actually doing it. No head tilt for effect, no self-conscious arrangement of posture, just a person in front of a painting, receiving it. He had not been in this gallery with anyone in years, not because he concealed it. It was not a private room, but the ball guests did not typically wander this far down the east corridor, and his household staff moved through it without stopping, and his council members, when they accompanied him to the palace, were interested in rooms where power was demonstrated rather than rooms where it was painted. The gallery had become, over time, simply his. He was aware, standing in the entrance, that he had brought her here. He had known she would be the kind of person who would see it correctly. He was not entirely certain when he had known this, or how. He would have said he did not trust first impressions, and he did not, generally, but something in the way she had spoken at the edge of the ballroom, something in the specific nature of what she had noticed and how she had named it, had told him. He stepped inside. She turned. Her eyes found his with the directness of someone who does not flinch when surprised. "I did not hear you," she said. "I know," he said. "I apologize. That was not intentional." She looked at him for a moment, then back at the portrait. "He does know he is right," she said. "I was thinking about whether that ever becomes comfortable." "Being right?" he said. "Knowing you are right," she said. "About something that everyone else insists is wrong. After long enough, does the sureness become normal, or does it always feel like standing against pressure?" He was quiet for a moment. It was a question he had his own answer to. He did not give it immediately. "I think," he said, "that it depends on whether you care about the disagreement itself or about the outcome. If you care about being recognized as right, it never becomes comfortable. If you only care about the thing being right, the decision, the position, the result, it is easier. You can let the pressure exist without needing it to stop." She considered this. "That requires a very clean separation between the thing and the self," she said. "Yes," he said. "Some people are better at it than others." "You?" she said. He looked at the second king in his gray coat with his expression of tolerating interruption. "I have been working on it," he said. She turned from the portrait to look at him. In the gallery's quieter light, not the warm flood of the ballroom chandeliers, but the cooler, steadier candlelight of wall brackets spaced along stone, she was easier to see clearly. The gold of her gown was less theatrical. The mask on her face was simply a mask, a thing she had made and worn, present without pretense. "I should not ask you personal questions," she said. "You have been," he said. "I know," she said. "I noticed." "I did not tell you to stop," he said. She held his gaze. "No," she said. "You did not." The clock somewhere in the palace struck the quarter hour, 11:45. She turned her head toward the sound, and he watched the small and private calculation that moved across her face. Time, carriage, the practical weight of a life that had requirements. "You need to leave," he said. "In a few minutes," she said. She turned back to the landscapes, but not yet. Not yet. He stood beside her and looked at the dark hills and the gray sky, and the music from the ballroom was a faint, muffled thing from this distance, and the gallery was quiet, and neither of them said anything for a while. It was one of the more comfortable silences he had been in recently. He noted this without analyzing it, which was itself unusual, because he was a person who generally analyzed things. "The painter," she said eventually. "You said he moved north." "Yes." I think about that, she said, choosing one place. 700 paintings of the same hills. You find it admirable, he said. I find it honest, she said. The echo of his own word returned to him with the slight difference that changes meaning. He had said honest about the landscapes. She was saying it about the choice to stay. Is there a difference, he said. She thought about this. Honesty about the world is one thing, she said. Honesty about what you need from it is harder. He knew what he needed. He stayed there and got it, instead of spending his life going somewhere else. And do you know what you need, he said. She glanced at him sideways. I know what the next 6 months require, she said. That will have to do. He wanted to ask what the next 6 months required. He did not. She turned from the paintings. Thank you, she said, for bringing me here. The North Corridor, he said. Third left after the woman in green. She nodded. She turned to go. She paused at the entrance to the gallery, not quite looking back, and said, The landscapes. I understand now why they are your favorite ones. Do you? He said. They are honest about what the world looks like when you are not performing it, she said. That must be a relief to look at. She left. He stood in the gallery alone for a moment longer. Then he went back to the ball. He thought, walking through the East Corridor, about a woman who had stayed past the reason for staying and known exactly what she was doing and done it anyway, and about the particular quality of honesty that does not announce itself, but shows up in the third paint test, and the doubled ribbon, and the choice not to leave quite yet. He had not had a conversation like that in a very long time. He thought, the morning, the file, the name. He walked back into the ballroom and found Oliver and said, The third movement. Oliver said, 2 minutes. He stood at the edge of the ballroom and waited for the music to begin. The East Corridor was quiet, in the way of corridors that are never the point of anything. Long and narrow, with tall candle brackets on the walls, and a runner of dark carpet down the center, that had been there long enough to show the worn path down the middle, where feet had traveled it for years. Esme walked beside the king and told herself 3 things. First, she was no one. She had a borrowed gown, a homemade mask, and a name she had not given to anyone tonight. She was a person-shaped gap in the evening, and when she left, no gap would remain. Second, the task was done. The letter was delivered. Whatever happened now was separate from the reason she had come. Third, she had never been inside a royal palace before, and was not going to pretend that she had. How many paintings are in the East Gallery, she asked, not because she particularly needed to know, but because walking in silence beside a king felt like a situation that required some kind of management, and she had not yet decided what kind. 42 portraits, he said, and 11 landscapes that the third king commissioned from a painter who was fashionable for about 6 years before everyone decided they were too dark. They are my favorite ones. She glanced at him. Why? They look like rain, he said simply. When I was a child, I thought they were mistakes. Now I think the painter knew exactly what he was doing, and the fashionable opinion of the time simply did not know how to read it. Esme thought about this. It takes a long time to understand that something being unpopular does not mean it is wrong. Most people never learn it at all, he said. The corridor opened at the end into a wider space, a tall room with no furniture except for the benches along the walls, the kind of bare benches that say, sit here and look, not here and be comfortable. The portraits covered the walls from floor to ceiling in close arrangement, their frames touching in some places, gold or dark wood or simple painted plaster depending on the era. The subjects looked down at whoever stood below with varying degrees of interest. Some of them were solemn. One, a woman in a dark green dress with pale red hair, looked faintly amused, as though she knew something about the viewer that the viewer did not know about themselves. Esme walked slowly along the wall. The portraits were better than she had expected, not because of their technical accomplishment, though several of them were clearly the work of serious painters, but because of what they carried. The older ones especially. They had the quality of things made when the person making them believed it would be one of the few surviving records of the subject. There was weight to them. The more recent ones, the last 3 or 4, had a slightly different feeling, like they had been made by someone who knew the world had other ways of keeping records now, and so the painting needed only to be decorative. She stopped in front of one near the center, a man in plain gray who was sitting at a table with papers in front of him, and an expression that suggested he had been interrupted mid-thought by the painter, and was tolerating the interruption as briefly as possible. Who is this? She asked. Second king. He was on the throne for 31 years and spent most of them rewriting the legal framework of the territory. The king stopped beside her. He was apparently very difficult to be around. His council called him relentless, which they meant critically, and he took as a compliment. He looks like someone who knows he is right about something, Esme said. He usually was. She studied the portrait for a moment. That must have been lonely. The king was quiet beside her. She did not look at him. She looked at the painting. It was, he said finally. The single word had a weight to it that did not belong in a casual conversation about a portrait, and she noticed this, and she made herself keep looking at the second king's face instead of turning toward him. She moved on. The landscapes were at the far end. 11 of them, as promised, arranged in 2 rows. They were dark. She had not expected quite how dark. They showed hills and water and sky in a palette of gray-green and slate and black, with small figures sometimes in the distance, moving through the weather, rendered in strokes that suggested motion without nailing it down. Rain was right. They looked like rain, or more precisely, they looked like the moment before rain, when the sky has decided but the ground has not yet understood. Why do you like them? She asked. They are honest, he said. The portraits are not honest? The portraits are accurate, he said. There is a difference. A portrait shows you what a person chose to present. These, he stopped, considering. These show you what the world was doing while the people in it were busy. She looked at the smallest one, a landscape with no figures at all, just a hillside and a sky that was 3/4 cloud. My elder would say that weather is the only thing that does not lie. She had not intended to say that. She heard it come out and pressed her lips together for half a second. Not long enough for him to see, but long enough for her to feel the small discipline of it. Your elder, he said. He is old, she said, after a moment, and he says things that are either very wise or completely ordinary, and I have not always been sure which. The ones you cannot decide about are usually wise, the king said. She glanced at him then. He was looking at the landscapes, his hands clasped behind him, and his profile was the same still, angular thing it had been in the hall. But there was something slightly different in the set of it here, in the quiet of the gallery with no crowd and no performance, a fractional lowering of some tension she had not noticed until it began to ease. You are more comfortable here than in the hall, she said. He turned his head and looked at her. I beg your pardon? The tone was not offended. It was surprised. I did not mean to say that aloud, she said honestly. And yet you said it? I did. She waited for him to be bothered by it. He was not. Yes, he said. I am. She turned back to the painting, the hillside in the gray-green dark, the sky made of decisions. Then why are you at the ball? Because I am the king, he said, and the ball requires one. Do you always do what is required? No, he said, but I have become better at it than I used to be. A pause, and worse, in different ways. She heard something in that which she did not press on. She had learned early that the moments when people say more than they intended were not moments to lean into. The way you received a person's unguarded words was either an invitation for more or a door closing, and she had never wanted to be the reason a door closed. The landscapes, she said, returning to safer ground. The painter. What happened to him? You said he was fashionable for 6 years. He moved north, the king said. Spent the rest of his life painting the same valley from different angles in different weather. His estate sold 700 paintings when he died, most of them of the same 4 hills. 700. The valley must have been extraordinary. She thought about that. Or he was. The clock somewhere deeper in the palace struck the quarter hour. 11:45, 15 minutes. She did not move immediately. The rational part of her, the part that had managed the entire evening on logic and preparation, told her to begin moving toward the exit, the carriage, the gate, the road back to the place she had come from, where Gideon was waiting and 40 people needed the world to work out differently than it had been working. She stayed for a moment longer. I should go back, she said. The ball continues until 2, he said. It was not an argument, just information. I know. She turned from the painting and looked at him directly. But I have what I came for, and it is better to leave before. She stopped. Before? He said. She did not finish the sentence. He looked at her with that steady, measuring attention that she had noticed in the hall and that felt different here, in the quiet, without the crowd between them, like the difference between seeing something through water and seeing it in open air. You came for something specific, he said. It was not a question. Everyone at a ball comes for something specific, she said. They just usually call it something else. What do they usually call it? An evening out, she said. A dance, a chance. And what do you call yours? She held his gaze. A delivery, she said. It was as close to the truth as she was willing to go. She watched his face to see if the word landed with any particular weight. If Philip Ash had mentioned the letter, if anything had already reached him, his expression did not shift in a way that told her yes or no. A delivery, he repeated. Yes. And it has been made. Yes. Then, he said, you have accomplished your evening. Yes. She turned toward the door of the gallery. Your mask, he said. She stopped. It is slipping on the right side, he said. She reached up automatically and touched it. He was right. The ribbon on the right had loosened, and the upper edge of the mask had drifted down slightly, the bead trim pressing closer to her cheekbone than it should have been. She adjusted it, retied the ribbon, felt the beads settle back into place. Thank you, she said. It is well made, he said. Despite the fit, she looked at him. There was something in the way he said it, not unkind, not probing, simply accurate, in the same way the second king's portrait was accurate, noting the real thing. I made it myself, she said. The words were out before she decided to say them. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, a small adjustment, the kind that happens when information moves a thought from one column to another. I thought as much, he said quietly. She did not know what to do with that, so she did not do anything. She stood in the doorway of the East Gallery with her homemade mask retied and her borrowed gown pooling at her feet and said nothing, which was, she thought, probably the right choice. The night air is cleaner through the north corridor, he said. It takes you to a side gate, rather than the main one, less crowded at this hour. She looked at him. Why would I need a less crowded gate? She asked. You do not, he said. But if you were someone who preferred to leave quietly, it would be the route. A long pause. Thank you, she said again. The north corridor is the third left after the portrait of the woman in green, he said. The one who always seems to know something. She almost smiled. I noticed her, she said. Everyone does, he said. She has that effect. She walked back into the main corridor. She counted the lefts. She found the third one and took it. She did not look back. Behind her, in the East Gallery, the king stood in front of the landscapes for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come, through the long corridor, toward the sound of the ball, which was still happening, still full, still performing its own version of joy in a room full of candlelight. Oliver was waiting at the entrance to the hall. The third movement begins in 12 minutes, Oliver said. I know, said the king. Oliver looked at him for a moment. Then, very carefully, he said nothing at all. They walked back into the hall together. Esme found the north corridor and followed it to a door that opened onto a small courtyard, and from there to a gate where two guards stood who were clearly not the front-of-house kind. They were quieter, more patient, and they opened the gate without asking her anything when she approached it. She stepped through. The night air hit her and she breathed it in, all the way down. She walked to the public road and found the last carriage and climbed in. The other passengers were talking among themselves. She sat in the corner and held the empty space where the letter had been against her side and felt the carriage start to move and watched the palace lights grow smaller through the window. She had done what she came to do. That was all this was. She told herself this clearly, with the same careful preparation with which she had told herself everything else tonight. She believed most of it. She was 20 minutes into the ride home before she let herself think about what had actually happened. She had delivered the letter, that was the job. That was the thing Gideon had sent her to do, and she had done it, and Philip Ash had taken the sealed envelope from her with a recognition that told her the right person had the right thing and would know what to do with it. Everything else was, she was not sure what to call it, not planned, not expected, not the kind of thing you prepared for when you were preparing to sneak through a palace gate with a homemade mask and a borrowed gown. She had spoken with the king. Not in the way you speak with a person who holds authority over your life and the lives of 40 people you are responsible for. The careful, formal, measured kind of speech that is always performing its own correctness. She had spoken with him the way she spoke with Dorothy when they were working through something together, directly, following the thought where it went, trusting that the other person could keep up. He had kept up. He had done more than keep up. He had met her, thought for thought, in the way of someone who was used to conversations where ideas were followed to their actual conclusions, rather than managed back to comfortable ground. He had known which questions to ask, and which silences to stay in. He had shown her the landscapes, because he understood she would see them correctly, and she had, and he had known she would. This was the part she was not sure what to do with. The carriage was moving steadily along the night road, and the other passengers were quiet or dozing, and outside the window the world was dark except for the scattered lights of houses and the occasional lamp at a crossroads. She watched them pass. She thought about the second king in his gray coat, the expression of tolerating interruption. She had meant what she said to Aldrich. She found it interesting, that expression, because it contained something true about a particular kind of person. People who are used to being right about things that other people resist tend to develop one of two expressions over time. Either they become openly contemptuous, or they become somehow more patient. The second king had developed patience. The expression in the portrait was not impatience, she thought, looking back at it in her memory. It was endurance. The knowledge that the painter's interruption was temporary and the work on the desk would resume. She thought Aldrich had something of the same quality. She pressed her thumb against the inside of her bodice again, the old habit checking for a letter that was no longer there. The absence was strange. She had held that letter for 2 days, had pressed her hand against it through the cloth to feel its edges, had thought about it every hour of the journey to the city, had tucked and retucked it as she moved through the palace, and now it was gone, which was the whole point, which was the success, and the absence felt like it should feel different from how it felt. It felt incomplete. She understood, sitting in the moving carriage with the darkness outside and the dozing strangers around her, that this was not about the letter. She had walked into that palace with a purpose that was clear and singular, and did not include anything that had happened after Philip Ashe took the letter. The gallery had not been part of the plan. The conversation had not been part of the plan. The woman in the green portrait, the landscapes of the same valley in different weather, the question about whether knowing you are right ever becomes comfortable, none of that had been in the version of the evening she had prepared for. And yet she had not been surprised by any of it. That was the specific thing she was sitting with in the dark carriage on the road home. She had been in a situation she had not planned for, with a person she had not expected, saying things she had not scripted, and she had not felt out of her depth. She had felt exactly herself. That did not happen often. She was, in most of the situations her life required, functioning at some fraction of herself, managing, adapting, choosing the words that would be most effective rather than the words that were most true. She was good at this. It had kept things intact during years when intact was the most you could ask for. Tonight had been different. Tonight she had been in a corridor, and then a gallery, and then a moment at the edge of the East Wing where she had said, without planning to, not yet, and meant it. She looked at her hands in the dark of the carriage. The ink from her earlier notes had faded. The brooch she had borrowed to pin the gown was still on her bodice, holding the too large fabric at the waist. She would need to return it. That was a specific item on a practical list that included many other things. She would go home. She would tell Gideon what had happened. She would wait. The waiting would be the hard part. Not because she was afraid of what would come. She had spent the ride telling herself this, and she believed it, mostly. She was not afraid of the formal process or the slow machinery of inquiry, or the patience that all of it would require. She had been practicing patience for years. She was good at it. She was afraid, in a small and very honest part of herself that she did not generally give much space to, of something much simpler. She was afraid that the evening would turn out to have been exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. A woman delivering a letter, a king being briefly kind, and nothing after that except the formal process running its formal course. That would be the right outcome. It would be the correct outcome. It was the outcome she should want and did want, practically speaking, because the pack needed the land needed the inquiry, and the inquiry needed nothing from her except patience and documentation. She pressed her feet flat against the floor of the carriage, and held still, and told herself to want the right things. The carriage moved on. Outside, the city fell away, and the road narrowed, and the lights became fewer, and then almost none, and the darkness was the real darkness of countryside without lanterns, and the sound of the wheels on the road changed to the softer sound of a dirt path. She was nearly home, she thought. He looked at the landscapes and said they looked like rain, and then she said, or he was, and he had listened to the correction with the particular quality of a person who does not resist being shown something better. She thought, whatever comes next, that was real. She told herself this and believed it and let it be enough for the night, and when the carriage stopped at the last stop on the outer road and she climbed down into the dark and walked the remaining quarter-mile home by herself in the cold, she was, she decided, something she could not quite name but that was closer to right than she had felt in a long time. She went inside. She slept. In the morning she would tell Gideon. She would watch his face when she told him about Philip Ashe and the letter, and then she would watch it when she told him about the gallery, and the man who kept the darkest paintings in his favorite room, and she would see in his expression whether he had meant for this to happen, or only hoped it might. She suspected he had hoped. Gideon was the kind of person who sent you through a gate knowing you might find more than you went looking for. She closed her eyes. Outside, the first birds were beginning. The letter reached the king's reading desk at 6 in the morning. Philip Ashe delivered it himself. He did not leave it with the night staff or the morning courier, or any of the 3 secretaries who managed the flow of documents into and out of the king's study. He carried it up the stairs from the receiving room, knocked once, and when the king said to come in, because the king had been awake since 5, which Philip had suspected, he placed it on the desk in the clear space to the left of the lamp and said, "From Gideon Cole of the Coleford Pack. By hand, via an intermediary. Last night." Aldrich looked at the letter. He did not pick it up immediately. "Via what intermediary?" he said. "A young woman," Philip said. "I did not get a name. She found me, passed it correctly, knew your protocol, knew the seal, knew my connection to Cole. Whoever sent her briefed her well. Did you speak with her?" "Briefly." Philip paused. She was composed, more composed than the situation warranted, if I am being honest about it. Aldrich looked at the letter for another moment, then he picked it up. The wax seal was intact, pressed with the ring he had seen Gideon Cole wearing the one time he had met the man in person, years ago, at a territorial summit where Cole had argued for 3 hours against a boundary redrawing that Aldrich had ultimately agreed was unjust. Cole had been right. Aldrich had been 24 and knew enough to the throne to still be testing the difference between the advice he was given and the judgment he was developing. He broke the seal. The letter was 2 pages in a handwriting that was still clear, but showed the slight irregularity of someone writing with pain in their hands. Cole's voice came through it immediately, direct, intelligent, without self-pity, which was its own particular kind of dignity. Aldrich read it once through without stopping. Then he read it again. The Coleford Pack had been reduced from 300 members to fewer than 40 over the course of 12 years, through a combination of the boundary redraws, a disease that had taken 2 harsh winters to pass, and the economic collapse that followed when the land they had farmed for generations was reassigned to a lord who had no interest in farming it, and every interest in stripping it for timber. The pack had filed 4 formal petitions through the council in the last 8 years. All 4 had been denied or lost in the process before they reached anyone who could act on them. What Gideon Cole was asking for was specific and small, a formal land acknowledgement, which would carry no legal force, but would create the documentary basis for a proper claim. 1 piece of paper, signed and sealed, that said, "These people were here, this land was theirs, and the record should reflect that." He was not asking to be made whole. He was asking to be made legible. Aldrich set the letter down. He looked out the window at the courtyard below, where the morning staff were beginning the task of clearing away last night's decoration. The lanterns being collected, the ropes that had held them coiled and stacked, 2 men folding lengths of banner cloth into careful squares. "How long has the petition been in the system?" he asked. 8 years, Philip said. "First filing was 12 years ago if you count the pre-formal request." "And why has it not reached me?" Philip was quiet for a moment that contained a careful word selection. "The council reviews territorial petitions quarterly. In practice, the lower priority land matters are reviewed annually, in the case of small packs with no political allies." "In practice," Aldrich said. "In practice," Philip agreed quietly. "They can sit for years." Aldrich was quiet. He turned the letter over in his hands and looked at the second page. The last paragraph was the one that had caught him on the second reading. Cole had written it differently from the rest, the handwriting slightly heavier, as though he had pressed harder on the pen. He had written, "I am not writing this because I believe in the petition system. I am writing it because I have one person left who moves quickly and thinks clearly and is not yet old enough to have given up, and she deserved to be given something to do that was worth doing. Whatever you decide about the Coleford lands, the record should show that we tried." Aldrich put the letter down. He stood up. "I want the complete file on the Coleford Pack on my desk before noon," he said. "All 4 petitions, the boundary documentation from the relevant redraws, and the land transfer record from—" "When was the timber claim made?" 9 years ago, Philip said. "That record too." Philip nodded. He had the expression of someone keeping a reaction carefully contained. He had worked with Aldrich long enough to know that this expression, this particular quiet efficiency, meant something had moved that had not been moving before. "There is also the matter," Philip said carefully, "of last night." Aldrich looked at him. "The intermediary," Philip said. "You spoke with her." It was not a question. Philip had been in the hall. He had seen the king take a route toward the east corridor that was not a route the king generally took at these events, and he had seen who was already walking in that direction. "I showed her the portrait gallery," Aldrich said. Philip nodded slowly. "And?" he said. Aldrich picked up the letter again and read the last paragraph a third time. He turned it over. He set it back down. She made her own mask, he said. Philip considered this. That is a detail, he said. Yes, said the king, it is. Philip left the room. Aldrich stood at his desk for a long moment, and then sat back down, and pulled the first of the morning's papers toward him, and began to work. He worked steadily until the Colford file arrived at noon, carried in by a junior secretary in a box that was thicker than it should have been for a pack of 40 people with no political weight. He opened it and read it from front to back. He read the first petition, which had been reasonable and carefully written, with supporting documentation that should have been sufficient. He read the council's denial, which cited a procedural issue that he recognized as a mechanism used to delay rather than decide. He read the second petition, which had corrected the procedural issue and added more documentation. He read the second denial. By the third petition, he was making notes in the margin of his own notepad in handwriting that got slightly sharper as it went. He called Oliver in at 2 in the afternoon and gave him 3 instructions that he expected executed by the end of the week. Oliver wrote them down without comment, which meant he agreed with them. When Oliver had comments, he said so. Silence from Oliver was endorsement. One more thing, Aldrich said. Oliver looked up. I want to know who the intermediary was, he said. The woman who delivered Cole's letter last night. Not a formal inquiry. I do not want her approached. I want to know. Oliver wrote this down too. Philip may be able to trace her through the invitation records, he said, or the mask, if it was made locally. There are only a few craft suppliers for the materials. Aldrich thought about the beads, the small glass beads along the upper edge, which had been chosen carefully, not for expense, but for how they would catch light. Someone who had thought about this, someone who had wanted it to work. The mask, he said, start there. He turned back to the Colford file. He worked until the light through the study window changed from afternoon to early evening, and then kept working. Oliver returned at 7 with a dinner tray and 1 piece of paper. The mask, he said, was made from materials purchased at a market stall in the lower quarter. The vendor remembered the sale because the buyer purchased 3 different gold paint preparations before settling on one. She was specific about the warmth of the tone. Warmth of the tone, Aldrich said. She wanted it to look good in candlelight, Oliver said. Aldrich looked at the piece of paper Oliver had placed beside the dinner tray. It was a list of 3 names, the vendor's best recollection of women who had come to his stall in the days before the ball asking for materials of this kind. The first 2 names were women known to the court, a minor noble's daughter and a merchant's wife. The third name was not known. The vendor had not caught all of it, but he had written down what he heard. Esme, from the outer roads, he thought, said she was from her elder's house. Aldrich read this. He set the paper down. He ate exactly half of his dinner and did not taste any of it. Outside his window, the city was doing what cities do in the evening, pulling in its daylight energy and replacing it with something more careful, more contained. Candles in windows. Voices at lower registers. The particular sound of a place settling into its nighttime self. He thought about a woman in a gold dress at the edge of a crowded room, watching 2 dancers who moved together like people who had learned trust through repetition rather than declared it. He thought about the way she had said, "Your elder," the lightness it was supposed to have, and the weight underneath the lightness. He thought about the last paragraph of Gideon Cole's letter and the specific word he had chosen, tried. We tried. He picked up the paper with the 3 names on it. He sat with it for a while. Then he put it in the Colford file, which he had moved to the left side of his desk, the side where he kept things that were not finished. He stayed at his desk until the light outside his window went from afternoon gold to the flat gray of early evening. The lamps in the study were lit by his household staff on a schedule that did not require him to ask. They came and went quietly, the way well-trained household people did, leaving warmth and light without requiring acknowledgement. He read through the Colford file 3 times in total. He read it the way he read things that required more than comprehension, for the texture of what had happened, the sequence, the specific choices that people had made at specific moments, and the outcomes those choices had produced. He was looking for the shape of it. The shape was simple, actually. A system that worked by accumulation, by allowing things to sit in queues, by requiring small fees for each stage of the process, by routing documents through reviewers who had connections to the parties with something to gain from delay, had simply worn a pack down. Nothing dramatic had happened. There had been no single decision, no single person who had said, "These people do not matter, and I am choosing to harm them." It had happened the way most failures happened, through indifference, through the slow wait of a process that benefited those who could afford to wait, and punished those who could not. He had known this was a possibility in his territory. He had done work to address it, or he had believed he had. The Colford file suggested the work had not reached far enough, or had not been designed well enough, or had been designed well enough and implemented badly, or all of the above in various combinations at various points. This was not comfortable to sit with. He sat with it anyway. Oliver brought him a second set of papers at 4 in the afternoon. This one a summary of the 3 other territorial PAC petitions that had been filed in the same council cycle as the Colford ones, and had received similar treatment. Not the same circumstances, not the same specifics, but a similar pattern. Oliver had pulled them unprompted, which meant Oliver had read the Colford file too and drawn the same conclusion Aldrich was drawing. He trusted Oliver's judgment on most things. He trusted it especially when it showed up without being requested. How many PACs in the territory are below the threshold for assigned legal representation? He asked. Oliver had the number ready. 63. As of the last territorial census, he said, PACs below 200 members do not qualify for the council's assigned legal service program. The theory was that they had enough internal structure to manage their own representation. The theory, Aldrich said, was written in the good faith belief that it was true, Oliver said carefully, and in some cases it is. In cases like the Colford situation, it is not. I want a review, Aldrich said, not the petitions that are already in the system. Those I will handle directly. I mean the threshold. Whether 63 PACs below that threshold is a situation the current program was designed to address, and whether the design is still adequate. Oliver wrote this down. He was quiet for a moment. That review will generate recommendations that require council approval to implement, he said. I know, Aldrich said. Hartley is on the council committee that reviews territorial social programs, Oliver said. I know that too, Aldrich said. Oliver looked at him with the mild eyes and said nothing, which was, again, endorsement. Do the review, Aldrich said. I will manage the council process. He went back to the file. At 6 in the evening, he stopped working, and stood, and went to the window. The courtyard below was quiet, the day's traffic finished. The last of the lanterns from the previous week's ball, there had been a string of them at the far end of the courtyard that the cleaning crew had missed, were still hanging unlit between 2 pillars, swaying very slightly in a wind he could not feel from inside. He thought about the woman in gold. He had been not thinking about her since that morning with focused and not particularly successful effort. He thought about her the way you think about things that have arrived in your mind without invitation and have not yet been categorized, with the specific uncomfortable awareness that the categorization itself was the issue, because none of the categories he had available quite fit. She had come to the ball with a letter and a plan. She had executed the plan with the clean efficiency of someone who had prepared for it. She had stayed longer than she needed to. She had spoken with him honestly in the way of someone who did not know they were going to and could not entirely account for it afterward. She had been to the gallery and seen the landscapes, and said they looked like rain, and then, or he was, about the painter who spent his life with the same 4 hills. And that second observation had been the better one, had been the real one, had been the kind of thing that you could only arrive at if you were actually thinking rather than performing the appearance of thinking. He thought about the detail. The vendor who remembered her because she had tested 3 paint preparations before finding the right warmth of tone. The mask that had been made for candlelight, by someone who understood light well enough to plan for it, who had enough patience to test and reject until the result was right. These were small things. He knew they were small things. He also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who had spent his entire adult life learning to read situations accurately, that they were not unimportant things. Oliver knocked and put his head in the door. Do you need anything else before I leave for the evening? No, Aldrich said. Go. Oliver started to pull the door closed. Oliver, Aldrich said. He stopped. The PAC elder's name, Aldrich said. Gideon Cole. He knew my father apparently. Or, his name appears in some of the older correspondence. I want to know the nature of the connection. Oliver raised his eyebrows a fraction. I can pull that tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is fine, Aldrich said. Oliver left. Aldrich stood at the window until the last light was gone from the courtyard, and the lanterns, the household ones, not the leftover ball decorations, came on. He thought about one more thing before he left the study. Gideon Cole had written, "She is not yet old enough to have given up." He was 31 years old. He had been the king for 7 years. He had given up various things, certain ideas about how the world worked, certain ideas about what was possible within the constraints of it, certain things he had not consciously decided to give up, but had found himself without, when he reached for them one day and they were no longer where he had left them. He was not sure. standing at the window in the last of the evening light with the Colford file on his desk and the name on the piece of paper Oliver had left him, whether not yet old enough to have given up, was a description of the person in the file, or a description of something else. He suspected it was both. He turned off the study lamp. He went to dinner alone, which was his usual condition, and ate without tasting it, which was less usual but not unprecedented, and told himself on the way back to his rooms that what he would do in the morning was read the rest of the files on his desk in the order they had arrived, and deal with them in that order, which was sensible and professional, and the thing a person who ran a territory correctly was supposed to do. He did this. He also put the Colford file on the left side of his desk, where the unfinished things went. Gideon Cole died on a Tuesday, 5 days after the ball. Esme was with him. She had been with him for most of those 5 days, sleeping in the chair beside his bed when she slept at all, waking to the sound of his breathing, and counting the intervals between breaths the way you count the intervals between lightning and thunder, to know how close the storm is. On the last morning, his breathing changed, became slower, more deliberate, like a clock being carefully wound down by someone who understood the mechanism. He did not open his eyes. His hands, folded on top of the blanket, were still. He had made his peace a long time ago with most things. She thought he had probably made his peace with this too. She held one of his hands and did not talk, because there was nothing left that needed saying. She had told him the night before about the ball. All of it, the gate and the gown and Philip Ashe, the gallery and the king, and the way the lantern light had moved across 42 portraits of people who had once mattered very much and now were only records. He had listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said, "And the king himself? What is he like?" She had thought about it. "Quieter than I expected," she said. "He listens more than he talks." Gideon had closed his eyes and said, "Good. That is the one you can reason with." She had not asked what he meant by that. She had sat with it instead, turning it over in her mind in the way you turn over something that might be a key if you could find the right lock. Now, in the morning quiet, his hand grew still in hers. She sat with him for a while after. Then she went outside. The morning was cold in the way of early spring mornings that have not yet decided whether winter is finished with them. The sky was clear and pale and the kind of blue that has no warmth in it yet. She stood in the yard outside Gideon's house and breathed slowly and let herself feel the weight of it for exactly as long as she could afford to. She had always known, in some part of herself, that Gideon was the thing that held the pack together. Not by force and not by authority exactly, but by the quality of his attention. He had known every one of the remaining 40 people by name. Not just their names, but the names of things that mattered to them, the specific shapes of their worries and their small joys. When he was no longer there to hold that web, it would not simply loosen, it would need to be relearned. Someone would need to relearn it. She went back inside. There were things to do. There were always things to do. She told the pack that morning, in groups, the way Gideon would have done it, going to each household rather than calling everyone together at once, because being told news in a crowd is different from being told it directly, and the people in this pack had been given enough news in crowds over the years that they deserved the other kind. By afternoon, the practical matters had taken over in the way practical matters do at these times, which is both a mercy and an imposition, because they do not allow you to sit too long with any single feeling. There were records to locate, a house to put in order, a meeting to call for the following morning so that the pack could decide together what their next steps were. She called the meeting. 19 people came. The other 21 had their own reasons: illness, young children, the particular kind of exhaustion that does not leave room for meetings, and she would go to them afterward. The 19 sat in Gideon's main room, which was the largest space they had, on chairs brought from other houses and along the walls and on the floor, and she stood near the empty chair that had been his and told them the truth as plainly as she could. The land acknowledgement petition had been delivered. They did not yet know what would come of it. Gideon was gone, and the person with the most structural authority in the pack, after him, was a woman named Dorothy Wells, who was 68, and sharp, and who had made clear over the years that she had no interest in leading anything, but was willing to advise anyone who was. Dorothy looked at Esme from across the room. Esme looked back at her. "I will keep things organized," Esme said to the room, "until we know what is happening with the petition. After that, we decide together." There were no objections. There was too much tiredness in the room for objections. She walked home in the dark. Home, for Esme, was a small house at the eastern edge of what remained of the pack's land. It had 2 rooms and a stove that worked well in cold weather, which was most of the year, and a window that faced east so that when she woke early, which she always did, She could watch the sky change color before anything else required her attention. She sat at the table. She thought about the king. She had been thinking about him in pieces since she left the palace, the way you think about something that you are trying to classify and cannot quite. Not the fact of him. That part was clear enough. King, power, decisions that would or would not change the shape of her pack's future. Not the obvious version of what he was. The other version, the one who stood in front of 11 landscapes of the same valley, and said they look like rain, as though this were not the simplest observation in the world, but the most accurate one. The one who had said, "Your mask is slipping," and not made it mean anything more than it meant. She pressed her palm flat on the table. She did not know him. She had spent an hour in his presence, in a corridor in a gallery, while wearing a borrowed dress and a mask that she had made herself in the light of a single candle. He had been polite and perceptive and, she chose the word carefully, real. More real than she had expected, which was not a category she had built into her expectations, so it landed somewhere for which she did not have a name. She was doing this too much, thinking about him too much. She had a task, and the task was not this. She went to bed. She woke before dawn. The messenger arrived 3 days later. She heard the horse first, the particular sound of a horse that has been ridden hard and is now being walked, the shift in gait, the breath. She was already at the window when it came through the gap in the stone wall that used to be the pack's main gate, before the gate was part of a repair cycle that had never gotten back around to it. The rider was young, a palace courier. She could tell by the livery, dark with a thin silver edge at the collar, the kind of uniform designed to be recognized without being flashy. He had a sealed letter in a case at his side. He asked for her by name, not by any name she had given anyone at the ball. By her full name, Esme Croft. She walked out to meet him. The morning air was cold against her face. She took the letter from the courier case with hands that she kept steady by not thinking about the steadiness of them. The seal was not the official crown seal. It was a smaller, personal one, a narrow ring impression in dark wax that she had not seen before but that she recognized, from everything Gideon had ever told her about how the palace worked, as a private seal. Something used for correspondence that the king chose not to route through the official record. She opened it. The letter was brief, 4 sentences, in a handwriting that was controlled and clear and went slightly faster toward the end, the way handwriting does when the writer knows what they want to say and the hand is keeping up. The petition from the Colford pack has been reviewed. A formal land acknowledgement has been issued and is attached. The records have been corrected to reflect the historical land claim. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the full situation in person, at your convenience, should you be willing to come to the palace. There was no signature line, just the personal seal. Esme read it twice. She looked at the attached document. 1 page, official paper, proper seal, signed and dated 2 days ago. A land acknowledgement for the Colford pack. 1 piece of paper that said they were real, and their history was real, and the record would reflect that. She stood in the cold yard with the letter in her hand and the young courier waiting patiently on his horse. She thought about Gideon Cole and a conversation she had not had with him, and a key he had handed her in the last full day of his life, without saying exactly what it was for. The person with whom you can reason. She looked at the courier. "Tell him I will come," she said. The courier nodded. He turned his horse and rode back the way he had come. Esme stood in the yard until the sound of the hooves was gone. Then she went inside and sat at the table and looked at the acknowledgement document for a long time. This piece of paper that was and was not the whole thing, that had arrived and had not arrived in time, that was a beginning in a story that had been mostly endings for a very long time. She pressed her thumb against the official seal. It was warm from her hand, not from the wax. She put the document in the small box where she kept things that mattered, and went to tell Dorothy Wells. Dorothy read the letter and the document and was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Esme over the top of the paper. "In person," she said. "At the palace." "Yes," Esme said. Dorothy was quiet again. "Gideon sent you to the ball," she said. "Yes. He trusted you to do something there that he could not do himself." "Yes." Dorothy folded the acknowledgement carefully and handed it back. "Then," she said, "you should go." She came back to the house and made herself eat, and then sat at the table until it was late enough to reasonably go to bed, and she went. And she lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about all the things that needed doing, and made a list of them in the order they were needed. The list was long. This was fine. Long lists were manageable. Long lists had the quality of making things concrete, taking the shapeless anxiety of a difficult situation and giving it specific items that could be addressed in specific ways. Item 1. Inform the pack formally and completely about the inquiry and the land use rights. Item 2. Locate and organize all of Gideon's documents. Item 3. Prepare the formal statement. Item 4. Return to the palace. She stopped at item 4 and started the list again. The pack needed to know what was happening, not just the bare news, the acknowledgement, the inquiry, but the shape of it, the meaning of it, what it could lead to and how long that would realistically take. She had learned, watching Gideon over the years, that the most important part of keeping people together through a hard stretch was not protecting them from hard information. It was giving them the hard information in a way that also gave them something to hold on to. Not false hope, Gideon had never offered that, but real assessment. This is the situation. This is what we can do. This is what we have. She went to each household the next day and did this. It took all day. She sat with each family and said what was true, and answered what could be answered, and was honest about what she did not know. She said, "The inquiry is real. The formal process is slow. The temporary land use rights on the eastern farmland are in effect now, and will remain through the duration of the process." She said, "Gideon's records are what we have. They are significant." She said, "I am going back." Nobody asked her not to. A few of them asked how she had found the king. She told them what she had told Dorothy, quieter than expected. He listens. A woman named Helen Pryor, who was 36 and had 2 children, and had been farming the edge of the available land with the careful thoroughness of someone who was not about to waste anything, looked at Esme over the table in her small kitchen and said, "And you trust him?" Esme thought about the desk with the signed confirmation on it, the park file on the left side, the statement reviewed in full before she was shown to the door. "I trust the work he is doing," she said. "The work can be checked. The work has documents." Helen Pryor nodded. "That is a more honest answer than the other one would have been," she said. "I know," Esme said. She finished the household visits by late afternoon and went back to Gideon's house to continue with the cedar chest. Dorothy joined her for the second half of the afternoon, the two of them going through the files methodically, sorting by date, by subject, by relevance to the formal inquiry, and building a picture of 60 years of careful record-keeping by a man who had understood, on some level, that the paper was the only permanent thing. In the 4th drawer, which had always been stuck and required pulling with both hands, they found the maps. Dorothy recognized them immediately. She went very quiet, looking at them, and then she set them on the table and sat down, and said nothing for a full minute, which was unusual for Dorothy, who was rarely quiet for a full minute. "These are the original surveys," Dorothy said finally. "From before the first boundary redraw, these are the actual measurements." Esme looked at them. They were hand-drawn, on heavy paper that had yellowed but not crumbled, in a hand that was precise and careful, and had used a fine pen and a steady ruler. "They show the original eastern boundary," Dorothy said. "Look, here, this line. That is where the farmland ends and the common land begins. This point, here, is where the marker was placed, the same marker we have been citing in the petition documentation. These support the claim," Esme said. "These are the claim," Dorothy said. She touched the edge of the map with one finger, gently. "If these are authenticated, they are the strongest documentation we have, stronger than anything filed with the council. These predate the first redistribution by 11 years. Esme was quiet. "He had them," she said. "He had everything," Dorothy said. She was still looking at the maps with the expression of someone who was doing emotional arithmetic, adding up what this meant, subtracting what it cost, that it had taken so long to find. "He kept the drawer stuck," Esme said. "I never asked him about it. He always said the 4th drawer had old paperwork that was not useful." Dorothy looked at her. "He may have been protecting them," Dorothy said quietly. "Old packs sometimes put important documents in places that are not the first place someone searching would look. If someone had come through that house looking for documentation to discredit or destroy." "The stuck drawer," Esme said, "is not the first drawer you open," Dorothy said. "It is probably the last." They sat with this for a moment. Then Dorothy picked up the first map and began carefully and methodically reviewing it against the formal land description in the most recent petition. Esme took the second. They worked in the steady, concentrated way of two people who have found something important and know that the importance requires precision. By the time the light was too poor to work by, they had reviewed all 6 maps. All 6 were consistent. All 6 told the same story. The land was what the pack had always said it was. "We take these to the palace with the statement," Dorothy said, sitting back. "Yes," Esme said. Dorothy looked at her. "You found these," she said. "The drawer was stuck," Esme said. "I pulled harder." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Gideon would not have been surprised by that, she said. Esme took the maps out the next morning and spread them on the table and looked at them in good light. She thought about a man who had spent 12 years petitioning a system and had never once stopped keeping records, who had believed in paper so thoroughly that he had put the most important paper he owned in the place least likely to be found, and had spent his last clear morning sending the fastest thinker he had through a gate she was not supposed to walk through. She thought about all the things that had needed to go right for this to work. She thought about the things that had, actually, gone right. The gate had opened. Philip Ashe had been where he was supposed to be. The letter had reached the desk, and she had stayed, past the task, past the sensible departure, past the last carriage, and into a corridor where two people had spoken to each other honestly about things that mattered. She rolled the maps carefully and wrapped them in the cloth she had found in the cedar chest, which was, she realized, exactly the cloth in which they had originally been stored, replaced by Gideon every time he had looked at them. He had checked on them. He had not forgotten they were there. He had simply been waiting for the moment when they would be needed. The king's court did not know what to make of her. This was clear from the moment Esme walked through the main gate, not the side gate this time, not the quiet door through the north corridor, but the front entrance of the palace, in daylight, with her own name announced to the guards who checked the visitor list and found it exactly where it was supposed to be. She was wearing her own clothes. She had thought about this carefully. She had thought about it for the full day and a half between Dorothy's instruction to go and the morning she had set out, standing in front of the two good dresses she owned, and understanding that neither of them would transform her into something she was not, so there was no point in trying. She wore the darker one, deep green, well-made, showing its age in the small ways that honest clothes show their age, and she had done her hair simply and worn no jewelry except the narrow silver bracelet that had been her mother's. She had left the homemade mask at home. It was sitting on the shelf above her bed, where she had placed it after the ball, still slightly bent from being tied in a hurry. She came in her own skin. That was all she had to offer, and she had decided, at some point in the night that preceded this morning, that arriving with less than that would be worse than arriving with nothing. The inner courtyard was different in daylight. The lanterns and banners were gone, and the stone that had looked so theatrical by candlelight was simply stone in the morning, gray and old and solid. Two stable boys crossed the courtyard ahead of her. A woman with a large basket of linens walked quickly along the far arcade, the domestic weight of a place that existed every day, not just during performances. An official met her at the inner door. He introduced himself as one of the assistant secretaries and informed her, in the tone of someone who had spent years saying things politely that were not necessarily polite in content, that the king was in his study and would be available to receive her within the quarter hour. He led her to a waiting room, small, comfortable, with a window overlooking a garden that was just beginning to show the first green of early season growth, and left her with tea she had not asked for, and a silence that was, she suspected, intentional. She sat with the tea and the garden and the silence. She thought about what she was here to do. The land acknowledgement had been issued. That was concrete, real, already a fact on paper. What the letter had called a discussion about the full situation was less clear. She had a sense of what Gideon would have wanted her to say. He had spent 12 years watching the formal petition process fail, watching boundary lines move, watching the geography of their existence shrink by degrees, and he had believed, in the principled and somewhat exhausting way of people who refuse to become cynical, even when the evidence for cynicism is overwhelming, that the problem was a problem of information, that the king did not know, and that knowing would be different from not knowing. Esme was not entirely convinced this was true. She had her own opinions about systems and the people who ran them, developed over 24 years of watching a system work very well for some people and very badly for others. But she also understood what Gideon had given her when he sent her to the ball. He had not given her a task. He had given her an opening. What she made of it from here was hers. She was still thinking about this when the door opened and the assistant secretary said the king was ready. The study was not what she expected. She had imagined something like the portraits, formal, large, weighted with the trappings of authority. What she walked into was a working room. The desk was large but covered with the genuine debris of actual work. Documents in organized piles, a pot of ink with the cap left off in the manner of someone who opens it so frequently it is not worth closing between uses, several books placed open and face down, that made a small part of her wince because that was hard on the spine of a book. Two chairs near the window, a fire that had been burning for several hours, judging by the settled quality of the coals, bookshelves along 3 walls, holding books that were clearly read and not just collected. He stood at the window. He turned when she entered. Without the half-mask, without the crowded hall and the candlelight, He looked different in some ways, and exactly the same in others. The same stillness was there, the quality of someone who had developed the habit of keeping their outward surface calm, because the alternative was less useful. The same attention in his eyes, without the formal atmosphere of the ball, without the distance and the performance. He looked like what he was, a man in his early 30s who worked very hard and was reasonably tired, and carried responsibilities that most people would find crushing if they thought about them too directly. She was not going to find him easier to speak with because of this, but she was going to find him more real. "Esme Croft," he said. "Your Majesty," she said. He gestured to one of the chairs near the window. She sat. He sat across from her. No desk between them. She noticed this. "You know I knew who you were," he said. It was not a question, but it was not quite an accusation either. "I suspected you might have worked it out," she said. "Between the vendor in the lower quarter and Gideon's name on the letter, it would not have taken long." He looked at her. "Philip told me about the vendor." "The gold paint," she said. "I tested 3 before I found the right warmth." He mentioned that. He paused. "You were careful at the ball, about not giving your name." "I was there in a capacity that was not official," she said. "A person in an unofficial capacity does not give their name." "You said you were no one," he said. She remembered that. Standing at the edge of the ballroom, no one can be as honest as she likes. "That was true at the time," she said. "And now? Now I am Esme Croft from the Colford Pack, which has a land acknowledgement that was issued 3 days ago and is the first official document the pack has received in 12 years that says we exist." She met his gaze steadily. "That changes the category somewhat." He was quiet for a moment, then something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but in the same direction. "You read Gideon Cole's letter before you delivered it," he said. She had not expected this. "No," she said. He looked at her. "I did not read it," she said, "but I knew what was in it. He told me the shape of what he had written, not the words." "He said we tried," Aldrich said. She was very still. "He said he sent the one person he had left who had not yet given up," Aldrich said. "He wrote it in a way that was clearly not asking me for anything about that. He was simply putting it in the record." Esme looked at the window. The garden below was very quiet, very green, very early in the season. "He died 9 days ago," she said. "I know," Aldrich said. "I was informed." "He did not know, when he sent me," she said. "He thought," she stopped. She took a breath, evenly. "He thought there was still time for the answer to reach him." "There often is not enough time for answers," Aldrich said. He said it without weightlessness, without the kind of easy sympathy that is really a bid to move past the difficult thing. He said it as though it were a true thing about the world that he had also encountered personally and had no false comfort to offer about. She looked back at him. "The acknowledgement matters," she said. "Even though he is not here to receive it, the documentation matters. The record is real." "Yes," he said. "But there is more," she said. "I know. The land itself," she said. "The acknowledgement is the foundation of a claim. The claim requires an actual process. Legal, documented, slow. And the pack has 40 people and very little to sustain them while a legal process moves. And they have been in this condition for 12 years while the timber rights on the land that was theirs have been held by Lord Edmund Hartley," Aldrich said. He said it the way you say a name when you have already had thoughts about it. "Yes," she said. He picked up a document from his desk. He read from it, not for her benefit, but from his own notes, checking his memory against the paper. "Hartley has held the timber rights for 9 years on land that was reassigned under a boundary redraw that my council has flagged in 3 separate internal reviews as procedurally compromised. The reviews were filed and not acted on. Procedurally compromised," she said. "The boundary was moved at the request of Hartley's father, who was on the council at the time and voted on his own request without declaring an interest, which is not permitted." She was quiet for a moment. "That is," she started. "Yes," he said. "Then the reassignment can be contested," he said. "It will not be simple, and it will not be immediate. These processes take time, but there is a basis." Esme sat with this. Esme sat with this. Outside, a bird landed on the garden wall and then left. "Why did the internal reviews not lead to anything?" she said, "if the problem was already flagged." Aldrich set the document down. He looked at her directly. "Because 3 separate reviews that sit in a filing system and are not followed up do not lead to anything. They lead to the appearance of due diligence." She understood that he was saying something here that was not routine for a king to say to a person sitting in his study. "You are telling me that the system failed on purpose," she said. I am telling you, he said carefully, that the system failed, and that the failure was convenient for certain people, and that convenience tends to outlast accountability, unless something moves it. What moves it? She said. He looked at her. You came in through the front gate, he said, with your own name. After the ball, after the letter, after all of it. You could have sent a letter back. You could have waited to see what developed. Gideon did not send me to wait, she said. No, he said. He did not. He picked up a different document, this one blank, with the official letterhead of the Crown. I am going to open a formal inquiry into the Colford boundary reassignment. That will take several months. While it is proceeding, I am going to authorize temporary land use rights for the pack on the section most directly affected, the eastern farmland, which has not been actively used by Hartley for the last 3 years. Esme held very still. The formal claim, he continued, will need legal representation. I can direct you to the Public Advocate's Office, which handles territorial matters for parties who do not have their own legal resource. They are slow but thorough. We have Dorothy Wells, Esme said. She was a land lawyer before she retired, 40 years ago. He looked at her. Then you are better positioned than most. We have her memory of being one, Esme corrected. That is not the same as the current code. No, he said, but it is a foundation. He set down the pen he had picked up. I will need a formal statement from the pack, its current members, the history of occupation, the documentation you have from the pre-redistribution years. Philip Ash can walk you through the format. I know the format, she said. Gideon kept copies of everything. He believed in paper. He was right to, Aldrich said. There was something in his voice, quiet and real, and not performed, that told her the documents on his desk were not the only thing he kept from Gideon Cole's letter. She stood. He stood. She looked at him across the space between the 2 chairs by the window, in the morning light, without a mask and without a borrowed gown, and she understood something that she had been refusing to understand since the night of the ball. This was not finished. The petition, the land, the formal inquiry, those would not be finished for months, perhaps longer, and the king had asked her to come in person, and had met her in person, and had put no desk between them, and had told her things about the internal workings of the system that were not the kind of things you tell someone you intend to handle through official channels alone. This was not finished. She did not let herself think past that. Thank you, she said. Come back, he said, when you have the statement from the pack. I would rather review it directly than have it go through the system again. She nodded. She walked to the door. Esme Croft, he said. She turned. The mask, he said. You left without it at the ball. I know, she said. I have it, he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the same even steadiness with which he held everything. This man who was very hard to read, and had been reading her from the moment she walked in. I know that too, she said. She left. Philip walked with her to the outer corridor after the meeting, which he did not always do. He walked with the particular quiet of a man who has something to say and is choosing the timing of it. She waited. At the point where the corridor split, left toward the front gate, right toward the working offices, he stopped. The king read your elder's letter the morning after the ball, Philip said. I delivered it myself before 7. I know, she said. He told me the specific line. Philip nodded. He was quiet for a moment. He opened the inquiry before noon that day, he said. He called me in at 7:30 and asked for the full Colford file by noon, which is fast. I have worked with him for 6 years. When he moves at that speed on something, it is because he has already decided. She held this information and did not reach for it too quickly. He reads everything before he decides, she said. Yes, Philip said. But he decides fast when something is clear to him. The petition file was not complicated. Once he saw it, the only question was how to move, not whether to. And the move was to open the inquiry himself, she said, bypassing the council. Yes, Philip said. That was about Hartley, she said. It was about the correct process, Philip said carefully, and also about Hartley. He met her eyes. The king is not careless about direct action. He does not bypass the council without reason. When he does it, it is because he has assessed the situation and concluded that the normal route will not produce the right outcome in the required time frame. She understood what he was telling her, not just about the inquiry, about the person who had made the decision. Thank you, she said, for telling me. You should know who you are working with, Philip said simply. She nodded. She walked to the gate. On the road home, she thought about what Philip had said, decided before noon. File on the left side of the desk, the side for unfinished things, which was also, she thought, the side for things being actively held. She thought about what it meant that he had moved quickly. Not because quick was the same as correct, she had seen fast decisions fail as often as slow ones, but because it told her something about how he had read the situation, not as a procedural issue to be managed through the appropriate channel, as something that required direct action. She thought about the thing he had said in the study, about her coming in through the front gate. You could have sent a letter back. You could have waited to see what developed. She had not sent a letter. She had not waited. Neither had he. She arrived home in the afternoon and went directly to Dorothy's house and told her everything, in the same direct order it had occurred, without editorializing. Dorothy listened without comment until she was finished. Then Dorothy said, "He told you what was in Gideon's letter." "Part of it," Esme said. "The last paragraph." Dorothy was quiet. "That is a personal detail," she said. "From a private letter." "Yes," Esme said. "He did not have to share that with you," Dorothy said. "No," Esme said. Dorothy looked at her over her reading glasses, which she sometimes wore pushed up on her forehead when she was thinking. "And the formal representative standing," she said. "He asked me to take it," Esme said. "He said he needed someone who could move quickly if the pressure changed shape, and someone he could speak to directly," Dorothy said. "Yes." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "Gideon," she said finally, "sent you because you were the fastest thinker he had." "Yes," Esme said. "He also," Dorothy said carefully, "had 6 other people he trusted. Slower thinkers, perhaps, but capable. He chose you specifically." Esme said nothing. "Gideon was a man who planned carefully," Dorothy said. "He kept 60-year-old maps in a stuck drawer. He did not do things accidentally." "I know," Esme said. "So," Dorothy said, pushing her glasses back into place and picking up the cup of tea she had let go cold, "the question is not what Gideon expected. He expected something. The question is what you expect." Esme looked at her. "I expect," she said slowly, "to prepare the pack statement, to return to the palace, to do the work." Dorothy nodded. "And?" Dorothy said. Esme was quiet for a moment. "And to keep doing the work," she said, "until it is finished. And then to see." Dorothy drank her cold tea without making a face about the temperature, which was a habit Esme associated with people who had learned that most things are acceptable if you do not make them worse by resisting them. "That," Dorothy said, "is a reasonable position." Dorothy Wells took one look at Esme when she came home and said, "Sit down." Esme sat down. Dorothy made tea, which she did at a pace that did not invite rushing, and then she sat across from Esme and placed both cups on the table and said, "Tell me." Esme told her. All of it. The study, the window, the documents, the inquiry into the boundary reassignment, the temporary land use rights on the eastern farmland, the formal statement they needed to prepare. Dorothy listened without moving, with the attentiveness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the details mattered. When Esme finished, Dorothy picked up her cup and drank from it. "He opened the inquiry himself," she said, "not through the council." "That is what he said." "Then he is bypassing someone," Dorothy said. "Hartley," Esme said, "or whoever Hartley has on the council." "Both," Dorothy said, "and he knows that. He opened it anyway." She set the cup down. "Gideon thought he was the right one. It sounds like Gideon may have been correct." Esme looked at the wall. "He kept the mask," she said. She had not planned to say this. Dorothy looked at her. "At the ball," Esme said. "I dropped it when I left. He picked it up. He still has it." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Did he tell you why?" "No." "Did you ask?" "No." Dorothy held her cup in both hands and looked into the middle distance with the expression of someone who was choosing their words for the specific use they intended. "Gideon sent you," she said finally, "because you were the fastest thinker he had. He sent you because you were not afraid of the right things." She glanced at Esme. "He did not say you were only supposed to go the once." Esme said nothing. "The pack needs the land," Dorothy said. "That is the practical reality, and it is a serious one, and it requires a serious response. You are going to need to go back. You are going to need to prepare the statement, work through the advocate's process, and maintain contact with the person who opened the inquiry. Because an inquiry that goes without follow-up from the requesting party can sit just as long as a petition can, and we have seen enough of that." "I understand," Esme said. "Good," Dorothy said. "And while you are being practical and effective about all of that," she paused, setting her cup down again, "it is also permitted to be a person." Esme looked at her. "I am not made of stone," she said. I know, Dorothy said. You are made of good sense and a considerable amount of iron, and neither of those things precludes you from having a feeling that you have not yet decided what to do with. Being a person and doing the work are not opposing activities. Esme was quiet. Dorothy stood. I will pull Gideon's records, the original land survey documents. He kept them in the cedar chest in the back room. If the eastern farmland is the section in the formal inquiry, we need the pre-redistribution surveys and the crop records from the last year before the reassignment. Those will be the strongest documentation we have. I know where the cedar chest is, Esme said. Then you know what to do, Dorothy said. She left. Esme sat at the table for a moment longer. Then she went and found the cedar chest. It took 3 days to compile the formal statement. Dorothy guided the structure from memory, and Esme wrote it. Her handwriting was cleaner and faster than Dorothy's, whose hands had stiffened in the last few years. They worked in the mornings, when the light was good, and Esme read it back to Dorothy in the afternoons while Dorothy sat in the chair by the window and said, faster here, cleaner there, too many words in this section, strip it back. They went through 4 drafts. The 4th one was right. Esme brought it to the other members of the pack, those who were well enough and present enough, and explained what it was and what it would be used for. Several of them signed it. Those who could not sign put their mark. She was careful and unhurried about this, because these were people who had been told for 12 years that their documents did not work, and she understood that signing one more document required its own kind of trust. On the 6th day, the reply to her return message arrived. She had sent a brief note to Philip Ash's office through the standard courier route, informing him that the pack statement would be ready within the week, and asking how to proceed. The reply came from Philip himself. Brief and clear. Bring the statement to the palace directly. She had a time and a date. Dorothy read the reply over her shoulder. Good, she said. Go. This time Esme told herself she was prepared. She was mostly prepared. The morning she was set to go, a messenger arrived from a different direction entirely. Not the palace route. From the west, which was the direction of Lord Hartley's estate. The messenger was polite, in the practiced way of messengers who have been coached to be polite regardless of what they are carrying, and he handed her a sealed envelope and waited for a response. Esme read the letter. It was from Lord Edmund Hartley. He had learned, through whatever means people like Hartley learned things, that an inquiry had been opened regarding the Coleford boundary reassignment. He wished to make it known, through this letter, that he was available to discuss the matter amicably. He used the word amicably twice. He also included, between the lines of diplomatic language, a suggestion that these kinds of disputes were typically resolved faster and more satisfactorily through direct private agreement than through formal process. He had not told her to stop pursuing the formal process. He had simply suggested that there was another way. Esme read this twice. She looked at the messenger, who was waiting patiently and professionally. Please thank Lord Hartley for his correspondence, she said. I will consider it carefully. The messenger nodded and left. She took the letter inside and put it on the table and looked at it for a long time. Then she went to Dorothy. Dorothy read the letter without expression. She set it down. She looked at Esme. He is scared, Dorothy said simply. He has influence in the council, Esme said. He could delay the inquiry. He could try, Dorothy said. But the inquiry was opened personally by the king, not through the council. Hartley cannot close something he did not open. He might find a way to make it slow, Esme said. Slower than it already will be. Yes, Dorothy said. They were quiet. Do not respond to him beyond the polite acknowledgement you already gave, Dorothy said. Do not engage with the private settlement idea. Do not close that door firmly. That creates an enemy. And do not open it either. Your path is the formal one. You have a document that needs to reach the palace today. Esme picked up the formal pack statement from the table. 4 pages. Clean. Signed. Thorough. Gideon Cole's records attached. Yes, she said. She put Hartley's letter in her bag as well, because it was a document, and documents mattered, and Gideon had believed in paper, and she had learned from Gideon. The ride to the palace was 2 hours in the early morning. She arrived at the front gate for the 2nd time, with her own name and her own face, and was met by Philip Ash himself this time, not the assistant secretary, which told her that his presence was not accidental. He wants to see you directly, Philip said. No preamble. Not just the document. She had expected this. Good, she said. I have 2 things to give him. Philip looked at the bag she carried. The statement? The statement, she said, and a letter from Lord Hartley, which arrived this morning, and which I think the king should be aware of. Philip's expression moved in a small, controlled way that was the Philip Ash version of raised eyebrows. He took her through the inner corridors without stopping, which was faster than her last visit, and told her that whatever else was happening today, she was not being made to wait. The study door was open. She walked in. Aldrich was at his desk this time, not at the window. He had been writing. The pen was still in his hand when she entered. He set it down without marking the end of the sentence he had been writing, which told her he was not concerned about the unfinished sentence. "You have the statement," he said. "And something else," she said. She placed both items on the desk. He read the Hartley letter first. She watched his face. What moved across it was not surprise. It was something closer to recognition, the look of a person who expected a particular move to come and is not pleased that it came on schedule. "He found out quickly," Aldrich said. "He has people," Esme said. "He does." Aldrich set the letter down. He looked at her. "He will try to delay. Dorothy believes he cannot if the inquiry was opened through you directly. He cannot close it," Aldrich said. "He can make it uncomfortable for the people who work within it. There are ways to apply pressure to a process that do not touch the official order." He said this directly. "I am telling you this because I want you to know what you may encounter, not to discourage the process." "I understand the difference," she said. He looked at her with an attention that was, she thought, slightly different from the attention he had given her in the study before, slightly more direct, slightly less measured, as though something that had been held at a careful distance was not being held quite as carefully. "The Hartley situation will require navigating," he said. "It will need someone on the PAC's side who can move quickly if the pressure changes shape, someone who can come here if things shift, and needs to reach me without going through 6 layers of official correspondence." "Philip," she said. "Philip is mine," he said. "He cannot be the PAC's contact without a conflict." She was quiet. "I need someone I can speak to directly," he said, "on the PAC's behalf. Formally, as a recognized representative, so the communication has standing. Dorothy could be designated. Dorothy Wells is 68 with stiff hands and a memory of land law from 40 years ago," he said, not unkindly. "She is an extraordinary resource. She is not the right person to ride 2 hours to the palace on short notice when Hartley's lawyers file a counter-motion." Esme looked at him. He held her gaze. "I am asking you," he said, "to be the formal representative of the Colford PAC in this matter." Outside the study window, a bird sang something brief and complete and stopped. "That is a real position," she said. "Yes. Withstanding to come directly to you. Withstanding to come directly to me." She understood what he was doing. She understood all of it, the practical layers and the other layers, the ones that were technically separate from the formal matter, and that she was not going to examine right now in the middle of a serious conversation that required her full attention on the serious parts. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He picked up the formal PAC statement. He read it from the first line. She sat in the chair across from his desk and watched him read what she and Dorothy had built over 4 drafts in 3 days, and she was aware of the strange particular feeling of a thing you made being held and read by someone who mattered, and she held herself very still and did not let it show on her face. He read to the end. "This is well done," he said. "Dorothy guided the structure," she said. "Your handwriting," he said. "Yes." He picked up the pen he had set down when she came in. He signed his name at the bottom of the first page, the receiving acknowledgement, the official record that this document had reached him. Then he opened the top drawer of his desk and took out a small glass paperweight, which he set on top of the stack as a gesture so small and habitual that she suspected he did not know he was doing it. She picked up the Hartley letter and put it back in her bag. "We will speak again soon," he said. "Yes," she said. She stood to leave. "Esme Croft," he said. She waited. "You are going to have to tell me at some point," he said, "what you were thinking when you walked through my gate the first night." She looked at him. "I was thinking about the letter," she said, "and the carriage schedule, and whether the seams would hold." "The seams," he said. "The gown was 2 sizes too big," she said. "I had pinned it." He was quiet for a moment. "It held," he said. "Yes," she said. "It did." She left. The formal representative paperwork arrived from the palace 3 days after her visit. Philip had moved it through quickly. She recognized his efficiency and the speed. And the documentation was exactly what had been described. Designation letter, scope statement, court registration form. 3 documents that together said, "This person speaks here, for these people, in these matters." She sat with them at the table and read them twice before she signed. She was not a person who signed things without reading them. Gideon had taught her this before she was old enough to have anything to sign. He had sat her down when she was 12 and showed her a document and said, "Read every word, and then read it again, and then read the part that is easy to skip because it is full of formal language, because that is always the part that matters most." She read the scope statement most carefully. It was specific about what the representation covered: the formal land inquiry, related correspondence with the Crown's office, attendance at formal proceedings on the PAC's behalf. It did not grant her authority over the PAC's internal decisions. It did not override the PAC's own governance. It said precisely, "She speaks for us in this matter, which we have agreed to, which we can withdraw." That last part was Dorothy's work. She had called Philip's office to request it be added. Dorothy had also been a lawyer, and Dorothy understood what clean documentation looked like, what it said and what it did not say, and how those two things together defined the real shape of an agreement. Esme signed. She sent the signed forms back by the return courier. Then she went to work on the formal PAC statement, which was the document that the inquiry actually needed. The PAC's account of itself, its history, its claim, in writing, in the formal language of territorial legal process. Dorothy guided the structure from memory, and the memory was reliable. 40 years was a long time, and certain things in the law had changed, but the foundation had not. A formal land claim statement needed a clear description of the land, a clear description of the claiming party, documentation of continuous occupation or use, and a statement of the specific claim being made. They had all of these things. Gideon's records were the continuous occupation documentation, rich with detail across 6 decades. The maps from the 4th drawer were the land description, more precise than anything the recent surveys had provided. The PAC's membership list, updated by Esme over the 3 days following Gideon's death, was the claiming party. The claim itself was the simplest part to write. It was also, in some ways, the hardest. Not because the language was complex. Dorothy had the language ready, the specific formulations that courts recognized as valid, the words that said what they meant, in ways that left no room for creative interpretation. Hard because Esme was the one who wrote it, and writing it required sitting with the full shape of what had happened to 40 people across 12 years, and translating that into the formal, even-toned language of a legal document that was not allowed to be angry. She was not angry. Or rather, she had been, and had moved through it, and what was left on the other side was not the hot version of anger but the cold and structural kind, the kind that looks like determination from the outside, because it has decided that the feeling itself is less useful than the action. She wrote clearly. She wrote precisely. She wrote in the way Dorothy had taught her, which was the way Gideon had taught Dorothy and Gideon had taught himself, without decoration, without extra words, without the impulse to explain the same thing twice, in case the reader did not catch it the first time. A good legal document does not beg, it states. They went through 4 drafts. Each one was shorter than the one before, tighter, more itself. By the 4th draft, every word was doing something specific, and nothing was there for comfort. Dorothy read the 4th draft in full without interrupting. She set it down. "That," she said, "is a document." "Yes," Esme said. Gideon would have been proud, Dorothy said. Not as flattery, as a fact, stated in the way of someone who knew Gideon well enough to know what he recognized as good work. Esme looked at the 4 pages. She thought about him, about the last morning, about the way he had held her hand and said not yet old enough to have given up, as though this were a specific quality that could be measured and was currently in her favor. She thought, "I am trying to make it stay in my favor." She folded the statement carefully and put it in the envelope for the palace. She sealed it with the PAC's mark, not a ring seal like Gideon's, but a plain wax pressed flat with the back of a spoon and initialed with the letters they had agreed on. EPC, for Esme, PAC, Colford, simple, readable, theirs. She went to tell Dorothy she would leave in the morning. Dorothy was in her garden, doing the specific kind of gardening that involved bending over plants and looking at them very closely without touching anything, which Dorothy said was how you learned what the plants actually needed, rather than what you assumed they needed. "I am leaving at first light," Esme said. "Good," Dorothy said. She straightened and looked at Esme with the direct attention she gave everything. "Take the maps." "I was going to." "And the original census record from 12 years ago," Dorothy said. "The one with Gideon's signature at the bottom. The dates are important." "I have it," Esme said. Dorothy nodded. She looked at Esme for a moment longer. "You are ready," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Esme said. She went home. She laid out what she would need, the statement, the maps, the supporting documents, her own notes from the previous palace visits, The Hartley letter in its own folder. Everything organized, everything labeled. The way Gideon would have done it, and the way Dorothy had taught her, and the way she had come to do it herself because it was simply the right way. She set it all by the door. She went to bed early, which she did when she had work ahead of her that she wanted to be clear-headed for. She lay in the dark and did not think about the mask on the shelf above her bed, or she tried not to. She was not entirely successful. She thought about the East Gallery and the 7 landscapes she had not yet seen. The same painter, the same valley, different weather. She thought about what it would look like, the thing that changed and the thing that stayed. She thought, in the morning. She slept. The formal representative title came with paperwork. Of course it did. Esme had known it would. Aldrich had explained, during her 3rd visit to the palace, which had been a working visit, 2 hours with Philip Ashe going through the procedural requirements of the land inquiry, that formal representation required a designation letter signed by the pack, a statement of scope from the king's office, and a registration with the court record. These were not complicated, but they required the same patient attention that all formal documents required, getting every word right, getting every signature in the right order. She spent a week on this. Dorothy reviewed everything with her usual mix of precision and impatience. Faster here, she kept saying, and too many words. And once, memorably, Esme, you have written the same point in 3 different ways. Choose one, the best one. The second one, Esme said. I agree, Dorothy said. Cross out the other 2. When it was done, it was right. The pack designation letter, signed by Dorothy and 10 of the other members who held standing within the pack's own internal structure. The scope statement, which was clear about what Esme could do in the pack's name and what still required collective decision. The court registration, which was 2 pages of formality that said, in essence, this person speaks here. She sent it through Philip's office. The confirmation came back in 2 days, which was fast for the palace bureaucracy, and Philip told her in a brief note that this particular set of documents had been processed quickly because someone at the top of the queue had indicated they should be. She knew what that meant. The Hartley situation developed in exactly the way Aldrich had warned it might. His lawyers filed a counter-motion to the inquiry within the first week, a procedural objection to the form of the inquiry itself, arguing that a formal land inquiry of this type required council review before proceeding. This was technically a question with a real answer, and the real answer was that the king had certain powers of independent inquiry that did not require council review, and that those powers had been clearly documented for generations. But real answers in formal processes do not close questions instantly. They have to be argued. They take time. Aldrich's legal team argued it. The process held. Hartley's lawyers found a different angle. They filed a second objection, this time regarding the original survey documents that Dorothy had located in Gideon's cedar chest. The objection claimed that the surveys were not properly authenticated for use in a formal proceeding. This was more credible, and Esme had to ride to the palace on a morning of persistent rain to work through it with the public advocate's office and Philip's team. She did not mind the ride in the rain. She minded losing the day. She said so to Oliver, who was the one waiting for her when she arrived, because Philip had been pulled into a different meeting, and Oliver was the person Aldrich trusted to handle the things Philip could not get to. Oliver had been with the king for 8 years. He had the specific quality of a person who had learned that being underestimated was a strategic asset, and had decided to lean into it entirely. He was not young, mid-40s, round-faced, with a manner so mild that it was easy to forget he had run 3 separate administrative crises in the last 2 years without anything visibly catching fire. He looked at her with mild eyes when she said she minded losing the day. "You are allowed to mind it," he said. "That does not mean it is unusual. Hartley's team is doing what teams like that do when they know the substance is against them. They make the process expensive. Expensive in time," she said. "And in energy," he said, "which is often harder to recover. What do we do about the authentication issue?" "The surveys need a formal authentication from a licensed land surveyor who can testify to their validity," Oliver said. "There is a short list of surveyors who are registered with the court. 2 of them are connected to Hartley's commercial interests, which creates a conflict. The remaining 3 are independent. The fastest available is working in the southern quarter. She can come to the palace within the week." "Does she need to come to the palace?" Esme said. "Or can she come to the pack's land? The original survey markers are still in the ground." Oliver looked at her. "Coming to the site," she said, "would allow her to compare the extant markers to the survey documents. That would produce a stronger authentication than reviewing paper documents in an office." Oliver nodded slowly. "That would produce a stronger authentication," he agreed. and would effectively counter the form of Hartley's objection by demonstrating that the documentation matches physical reality rather than simply asserting it. "Can you arrange it?" she said. "I can," he said. She spent 3 hours with Oliver that morning working through the procedural timeline, the documentation that needed to exist, and the sequence of steps that would move the inquiry from contested to resolved in the shortest time the system allowed. Oliver was meticulous, and she learned quickly that he was also genuinely good at this, not just technically competent, but strategically so, able to see 3 steps ahead in the process and identify where the pressure points were. At noon, Oliver stood and said, "The king asks whether you have time to speak with him before you return." She looked up from the notes she had been making. "Yes," she said. She had not seen Aldrich since the second visit. The working sessions had all been with Philip or Oliver. She understood this was how formal processes worked. The king's direct involvement was for the substantial moments, not the procedural ones, but she had also become aware, in a way she was managing with the same care she applied to everything, that the substantial moments were the ones toward which the procedural ones were always moving. She followed Oliver to the study. Aldrich was at the window. She thought he had a habit of this, standing at windows before conversations, as though the outside view reset something that needed resetting. She had started doing it herself in the mornings, standing at her east-facing window while the sky changed, and she was not fully certain when that had started. He turned. "Sit down," he said, which was the thing he said when they were about to have a real conversation rather than a formal one. She sat. He sat across from her. "How is the pack?" he said. Not a formal inquiry, an actual question. "Managing," she said. "The temporary land use rights on the eastern farmland have made a difference. 2 of the families who were talking about leaving in the spring have decided to stay through the season, at least, to see what the inquiry produces." "Good," he said. "Dorothy has started teaching a land law class," Esme said. 3 afternoons a week. 6 people are attending. She is pretending she did not plan this. Something moved in his expression. That thing that was close to a smile, but lived slightly to the side of one. In the same territory but not quite the same country. "Did you plan it?" he said. "I mentioned to her that the pack would benefit from having more than one person who understood the documentation," Esme said. And she started teaching the class," Esme said. "You are careful about how you lead," he said. She looked at him. "I am not leading." "You are the formal representative," he said. "You organized the statement. You identified the authentication solution this morning before Oliver could think of it. You kept 40 people in their homes through the winter by giving them something real to wait for." He held her gaze. "What would you call that, if not leading?" She was quiet. "I do not have a title," she said. "Neither does the method," he said. "That does not change what it is." She looked at her hands. They were ink-stained from the morning's notes. She had not noticed until now. "Gideon led the pack for 30 years, she said. "I am holding things in place until the formal process finishes and the pack can decide what they want." "Gideon is not there," Aldrich said. He said it simply, without sharpness. "And the pack is not deciding anything else right now because you are taking care of the thing that needs to be taken care of first. That is leadership. You can call it something else if you prefer." She did not respond to this. She looked at the window instead, at the garden below where the green had deepened since her first visit. The season was real now, not just beginning. Things were growing. "Hartley will file again," she said. "Yes," he said. "And we will counter it." "Yes. And this will go on for several more months." "At minimum," he said. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "I do not mind the work," she said. "I want to say that clearly, because I am about to say something that might sound like I do. The process is tedious when it is designed to be tedious, and it costs time and energy, and 2 hours on a horse in the rain, and I do not mind any of that. I am glad there is a process to be in." He was watching her carefully. "I am." She paused. She chose the word precisely. "Grateful. That the inquiry exists, that the acknowledgement exists, that someone with the authority to move things moved them." She looked at him. "I do not know how to say that without it sounding like the kind of thing people say when they want something, so I am saying it in the most direct way I know how, and you can decide what it means." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I know what it means," he said. "Then good," she said. He picked up a document from his desk, and she thought for a moment that they were returning to work, but then he set it down again without looking at it. "The mask," he said. She went still. "I have been thinking about what to do with it," he said. "It is yours. I left it at your ball." "Intentionally or accidentally," he said. She looked at him. "Accidentally," she said. "I did not think it was intentional," he said, "but I wanted to hear you say it." She was not going to ask him why. She was not going to ask him why. "You can have someone return it," she said, "by courier." "I could," he said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Or," he said, "you could collect it yourself. When you next come in, which, given the timeline of the inquiry, will be within the fortnight." She looked at him. "That is a very long time to hold a mask that could be sent by courier." "Yes," he said, "it is." She stood. He stood. Across the study, with the window and the deepening garden and the late morning light coming in flat and honest, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said the thing that sat in the room between them, because neither of them had yet built the language for it. They were two people who dealt in precision, in exact words, in documents that said what they meant, and this was not the kind of thing that had documents. "Fortnight," she said. "Fortnight," he confirmed. She left. She arrived home in the late afternoon. The Pax land looked different to her now than it had looked 6 months ago, not physically. The same fields, the same stone walls in varying states of repair, the same low hills that caught the evening light in the particular orange that she associated with home in the specific way of things you have grown up looking at. But the feeling of it was different. The eastern farmland, which she could see from the road as she rode in, had been cleared and turned. 2 families had already built a temporary field shelter near the stone boundary marker. The marker itself, the one she had cited in the petition documents, the one the surveyor had authenticated against the old maps, stood exactly where it had always stood, solid and old and indifferent to all the paper that had been written about it. She stopped her horse at the edge of the turned earth. She looked at it for a moment. Then she rode on. Clara Field had told her, during the morning's working session, that the documentation process through the autumn would require approximately 4 more formal visits to the palace for signature and review. 4 visits. She calculated the riding time and the day loss and the work that would need to be managed here while she was away, and she built a rough schedule in her head of how it could be done. Dorothy would manage the daily legal elements. Helen Pryor had turned out to have an excellent memory for process detail, and had become, over the last 2 months, the person who organized the record-keeping and cross-referenced documents without being asked to. 2 of the younger men in the pack had been attending Dorothy's land law class from the beginning, and could now read a formal boundary description without help. They had built capacity while the formal process ran. She had not planned this exactly. She had simply created the conditions for it by being honest with people about what was needed and treating them as capable of contributing, which they were, which they had always been. She thought about what Aldrich had said. She had not been sure, at the time, whether he was describing her or making a point about something larger. Both, perhaps. He had a habit of saying things that operated on 2 levels simultaneously, which she had noticed and respected, and which was occasionally, she admitted to herself, a little exhausting, not because she could not follow it, but because following it required a degree of attention that left less available for other things. Like keeping her expression appropriately professional in a study where a man who ran a territory had just said, in the most careful possible words, that he found her very difficult to be indifferent to. She unsaddled her horse and put her in the small stable and went inside. She made tea and sat at the table and looked at her notes from the morning, and at some point the tea went cold without her drinking it, which was more Dorothy's habit than hers, and she noticed this, and drank the cold tea anyway. She thought, fortnight. The word had been offered very deliberately. Not soon, not when you are next in the area, not the next time the formal process requires your attendance. Fortnight. A specific interval. Not so short as to be urgent, not so long as to suggest indifference. The mask was still on the shelf. She had thought, briefly, about putting it somewhere less visible, a drawer perhaps, a box. The same cedar chest where Gideon's records had lived for 60 years. But she had not done it, and she had not done it deliberately, which meant she had decided not to do it, which meant, she looked at the shelf, she was not pretending it was not there. It had held, at the ball, in the crowd, through the gallery, until she ran. It had cracked when she ran, because she had made it for holding, not running. There was a lesson in that, possibly, though she was not sure she was ready to name it. She put the notes away. She went to find Helen Pryor and tell her that the morning's work had gone as planned, and that the next formal session would be in 3 weeks, and that they were through the worst of it. Helen Pryor looked at her over the fence she had been repairing and said, "And the other part of it?" Esme raised her eyebrows. "The other part," Helen said, "that is not about the legal process." Esme looked at her. Helen had 2 children and had been farming difficult land for 12 years, and had watched Esme come back from the palace 4 times and leave for it again, and she was not a person who missed things. That part, Esme said, is also proceeding. Helen nodded, with the slight smile of someone who has asked the exact right question and has received enough of an answer to be satisfied with it. Good, she said. Go tell Dorothy. Esme went and told Dorothy. Dorothy listened. She was quiet for the same long moment as always, the moment of careful calculation. Then she said, Fortnight. Yes, Esme said. And you will go back then, Dorothy said. Yes, Esme said. Good, Dorothy said, in the same tone Helen had used, which told Esme something about the conversations these two women had been having while she was away, and which she decided not to examine too closely. She went home. She looked at the mask. She thought, 10 days, not a fortnight. 10 days because the Hartley development moved everything, and sometimes the thing you were told to wait for simply arrives before the waiting is finished. She thought that was probably true of more than legal timelines. She sat at the table in her kitchen, in her house with the east-facing window, on the edge of land that was nearly theirs again, and she was alone and it was quiet and the evening was coming in through the glass in the long flat light of summer. She was 24 years old. She had a pack and a cause and a formal representative standing and a broken mask on a shelf. She had a king who had cleared a morning and kept a mask in a desk drawer for 10 days instead of sending it by courier, and said, as directly as a careful man could say such a thing, that he found it very difficult to be indifferent to her. She thought about Gideon Cole, who had believed in paper and in keeping things in the right drawer and in sending the right person through the right gate at the right moment. She thought, he planned this. Not all of it. He could not have planned all of it. But he had sent her knowing that the gate led to a palace, and the palace led to a man, and the man was the kind who would read a letter at 7 in the morning and open an inquiry before noon, and none of that was accidental. She sat with this until the evening was fully in, and the kitchen was dark. Then she lit the lamp. She had work to do in the morning. She always had work to do in the morning. That was not a complaint. That was just the shape of things, and the shape of things, she had decided, was one she could hold. The fortnight became 10 days. Not because of the mask or the thing they were not saying, but because Hartley moved again and moved harder than anyone had predicted, and when Esme arrived at the palace with her notes and the surveyor's authentication and 3 additional documents that Dorothy had located in the 4th drawer of Gideon's old filing cabinet, documents that none of them had known existed, hand-drawn property maps from 60 years ago that showed clearly the original boundaries, it was not Oliver who met her at the inner door. It was Philip Ashe, and Philip Ashe had the expression of a man who had been awake since before dawn managing something. Hartley went to the council, Philip said, walking, not waiting to speak while standing still. Esme matched his pace. He cannot close the inquiry through the council. He did not try to close it. He called for a formal review of the king's independent inquiry powers, specifically, whether a land dispute between a territorial pack and a council member's family falls within the scope of independent royal inquiry or requires full council involvement. Esme absorbed this. That is a procedural question with a clear historical answer. Yes, Philip said. But it has to be answered formally, and formally means in front of a panel, and a panel takes 3 weeks to convene, and while it is convening, all inquiry activities are technically suspended. She stopped walking. They can suspend the inquiry. For the duration of the review, yes. She stood in the corridor and was very quiet. The surveyor's authentication, she said. Already filed and formally received, Philip said. Before the suspension, it is in the record. It cannot be retroactively excluded. So we have it. We have it. And the suspension. We have that too, Philip said. She looked at the wall. A portrait of someone she did not recognize hung there, a woman in a formal court dress looking past the painter, with an expression that managed to be both composed and slightly exasperated, and Esme thought, I understand that. 3 weeks, she said. Minimum, Philip said. The panel review could run longer. Hartley's team will make it run longer if they can. And then, Philip said, if the panel rules as it should, and the historical record strongly supports that it will, the inquiry resumes, with all filed documentation intact, and Hartley has spent 3 weeks delaying a process he cannot ultimately stop. Esme started walking again. He is burning time, she said. That is all he can do. Yes, Philip said. And time. For the pack. I know, Philip said quietly. The temporary land use rights remain in effect regardless of the inquiry status. I confirmed this with the legal office this morning before you arrived. The suspension does not touch those. She exhaled slowly. Good. Philip led her to a different room than the one she usually worked in. Not the study, but a larger conference room on the same floor, with a long table and several chairs. 2 members of Aldrich's legal team were already there. They worked through the morning on the formal response to the council review request, the brief that Philip's office would file, which needed to be precise and well-referenced and absolutely clean, because anything that could be technically challenged would be technically challenged. She contributed everything she had. The hand-drawn maps from Gideon's 4th drawer went into the file as supplementary historical documentation. The surveyor's authentication was cross-referenced. The PAC designation letter and her formal representative standing were cited in the cover page. At one point, one of the legal team members, a young woman named Clara Field, quick-minded and careful with citations, looked up from the document she was reviewing and said, "Who pulled the property maps from the original source? They are not in the initial petition file." "They were in a filing cabinet," Esme said. "Gideon Coles?" "Yes." Clara Field looked at her over the papers. "If these maps hold up to dating verification, they are the strongest thing in the entire file. Did he know he had them?" Esme thought about the 4th drawer of the filing cabinet, which had been stuck and required force to open. She thought about a man who kept every document for 60 years, in a house that grew smaller around him, as everything else shrank. "He knew he had everything," she said. "I do not think he always knew exactly what everything contained." Clara Field nodded. She went back to the document. At noon, Philip put his head in the door and said that the king would like to see her when the morning's work was concluded. The word when, not if, meaning it was not a question. She finished what she was doing. She signed the places that required her signature. She thanked Clara Field and the other member of the legal team, and she meant it, because they were good at what they did, and had treated her as a colleague in the work rather than an outside party being managed through it. She went to the study. The door was open, as it had been the second time. Aldrich was standing at the window. She came in. He turned. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who had been thinking about something specific, and now had the specific thing in front of him. "Sit," he said. She sat. He sat. "The panel review," she said. "I know," he said. "Philip briefed you." "This morning," he said, "before you arrived." He looked at her. "He also confirmed that the authentication is in the record, and the temporary rights are unaffected. You will have received that information already." "I did," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him with surprise that she did not bother concealing. "The petition process," he said. 12 years of your PAC's history sitting in a system that did not see it. I did not know. That is true. But not knowing is not the same as blameless. A system that I oversee failed people who deserved better from it." He held her gaze. "I am sorry." She sat with this. She had not expected it. She had expected competent management of a difficult process. She had expected the king who knew his law and his leverage and his strategic positioning. She had not expected this, the quiet, direct acknowledgement that carried no excuse in it, no condition, no deflection to systemic abstractions, just the plain fact of it and the plain admission. "Thank you," she said. "That matters." "It should not be enough," he said. "It is not," she said, "but it is not nothing." He nodded. She looked at the window. "The panel will rule correctly," she said. "Philip is confident. So is the legal team. They are right to be," he said. "The historical precedent is clear. Hartley's lawyers know this too. Then he is running out of angles." "He has one more," Aldrich said. "He has not played it yet. When his legal angles are exhausted, he will try a different kind of pressure." She looked at him. "Social." "Yes," he said. "He has relationships in the court, and the court talks, and one of the things it will eventually say is that the king is paying very direct personal attention to a small territorial PAC's land dispute, which is not, under ordinary circumstances, the kind of thing that receives this level of direct attention." She understood precisely what he was saying. She looked at her hands, ink-stained today as well, from the morning's work. She had noticed earlier, but now she was looking at them deliberately, buying herself a moment. "You are concerned about how it will be read," she said. "I am informing you of how it will be read," he said. "There is a difference." She looked up. He was watching her with the same steadiness as always, but underneath it, barely underneath it, the way the subterranean current of a river shows itself in the surface movement of water, there was something that required more of him to hold still. "How will it be read?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That a woman came to the masquerade in a borrowed dress and a mask she made herself," he said carefully. and delivered a petition that had been buried in a system for 12 years, and came back in her own name, and did the work, and kept coming back. And the king, he paused, that the king found this very difficult to be indifferent to. The study was very quiet. Outside the window, the garden held its green. That is how it will be read, she said. Yes, he said. And is that reading accurate? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. He had the quality, in this moment, of someone who had been precise all his life and was discovering that precision was not a tool that worked for everything. Yes, he said. She was quiet. The mask, he said. She looked at him. He opened the top drawer of his desk. He took out the mask, her mask, gold paint and glass beads and a cracked wing on one side that had caught on a stone pillar when she ran, and he set it on the desk in the clear space between them. The wing that had broken was still attached but bent. The ribbon on the right side had frayed slightly. The beads along the upper edge caught the light from the window and threw it back in small scattered points. She looked at it. It is a good mask, he said. It is a broken mask, she said. Yes, he said. It is still a good one. She reached forward and picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. The inside was worn smooth, where it had pressed against her face for 2 hours of one evening, in a life that had been, in large part, about managing things that were not easy, with whatever she had available to manage them with. She had made it with a single candle in 3 hours and 3 different gold paint preparations before she found the right warmth of tone, and it had held all night, and it had cracked when she ran because she had not made it for running. She had not made it for any of this. I am not a court person, she said. I know, he said. I am from a pack of 40 people on land that is in the middle of a legal dispute. I have 2 dresses. I make masks out of market stall materials and pin borrowed gowns with borrowed brooches. Yes, he said. And you are the king. Yes, he said. That is also true. She looked at the mask in her hands, the beads, the cracked wing. Gideon sent me because I was the fastest thinker he had, she said, and because I was not afraid of the right things. He was right about both, Aldrich said. She looked up. He looked back. I am afraid, she said, of the wrong things. Sometimes, the things that are not actually dangerous but feel very large. I know that feeling, he said. And she believed him, because she had been watching him long enough to know that the stillness was not the absence of feeling, it was the management of it. They were, in this way, more similar than different. The inquiry will resolve, she said. Yes, he said. The pack will be well. I intend it, he said. And after, she said, when the formal representative standing is no longer required because the matter is closed. The standing can be renewed, he said, for other matters. Packs of this size often have ongoing representation needs. She looked at him. That is a very formal way to say something, she said. I am a formal person, he said. You are a person who stands at windows before conversations, she said, and keeps broken masks in desk drawers for 10 days instead of sending them by courier. You are formal the way the second king in the portrait was relentless, which is to say, you mean it as a description, and other people sometimes mean it as a criticism. Something happened in his face, not the near smile, not the controlled adjustment, something more open, something that cost him less effort than the other expressions, which made it, in its own way, more significant. Come back, he said, after the panel, before the inquiry resumes. For the formal update, she said. Yes, he said, for the formal update. She stood. She put the mask in her bag. He stood. She looked at him one last time before she turned toward the door, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at the landscapes in the gallery, not at what they were showing on the surface, but at what they were doing underneath it. I will come back, she said. She walked out. Philip was in the corridor. He handed her a sealed copy of the morning's brief. She took it and walked to the front gate, and through it, and down the path to the public road where her horse was tied. She put the mask in the saddlebag with the brief. She rode home. 2 hours in the early afternoon, the sky clearing and the roads drying and the green on the sides of the road the real, deep green of a season that had made up its mind. She rode and did not think, or tried not to, and the trying was its own kind of thinking. The pack needed the land resolved. That was real, and it was urgent, and it was the thing she was there for. Everything else was also real. She had not decided what to do about everything else. She thought about Gideon Cole and the last paragraph of his letter, and the specific word he had chosen, tried. She thought about what he had also said to her in the morning light of his last good day, not that she was the right one, or the chosen one, or the best one. He had said, "You are not afraid of the right things." The right things, meaning the things that actually matter. The things worth being afraid of are the things that can actually hurt you. Embarrassment cannot. Inadequacy cannot. The gap between your borrowed dress and someone else's court gown cannot. Those are not the dangerous things. The dangerous thing was walking away from something real, because real things required you to risk being wrong. She had never been able to make herself walk away from those. She rode home. Dorothy was in the yard when she arrived, watering the early plants with the particular dedication of a person who treats small growing things as seriously as large legal matters. Esme dismounted. "How was it?" Dorothy said, not looking up from the plants. "Complicated," Esme said, "and clear, both at the same time." Dorothy looked up at her. Esme looked back. "Right," Dorothy said. She went back to watering. "Go in and eat something. You have been on the road since morning." Esme went inside. She took the mask out of the saddlebag and put it on the shelf above her bed, where it had been before. It looked different now, not because anything about it had changed. It was the same mask. Gold paint, glass beads, cracked wing. She had made it herself, with what she had, and it had held through everything she had needed it to hold through. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she went to eat something. Because Dorothy was right, and she had been on the road since morning, and the practical world did not pause for the complicated and clear things. It never did. That was not a complaint. The panel ruled in 22 days. Not the 3 weeks minimum that Philip had predicted. Not the longer stretch that Hartley's lawyers had pushed for. 22 days, which was fast enough that Philip, when he told Esme the news by courier, added a single line at the bottom of the formal notification in his usual careful hand. The historical precedent was so clear that extending deliberation would have required a reason, and no one could manufacture one under examination. The inquiry resumed. It moved quickly after that. Quickly, in legal terms, meant another 6 weeks. But they were 6 weeks in which Hartley's team had exhausted most of their tools, and the remaining objections were minor enough to be resolved in writing without panel review. The hand-drawn maps from Gideon's fourth drawer were dated by a specialist at the university, who confirmed they were genuine and original and 63 years old, which placed them clearly in the pre-redistribution period. The surveyor's authentication of the original markers stood without challenge. Esme made 4 more trips to the palace during those 6 weeks. 2 of them were working sessions with Philip and Clara Field and the legal team, long days of documentation review and formal correspondence, and the very specific kind of concentration required to hold a complex process together across multiple fronts. One was a brief visit to sign final forms when the formal land inquiry concluded and the recommendation for restoration of the original boundary was issued, a moment that was bureaucratically undramatic and practically significant in every possible way. The 4th visit was different from the others. She did not know, exactly, what had shifted. She understood the sequence of events. The inquiry was concluded, the recommendation was made, the legal process had moved into its final formal stage, and while there was still work to do in the coming months, the fundamental question of whether the PAC's claim was valid had been answered. Yes, it was. The record now said so. She arrived at the front gate on a morning that was high summer, the kind of morning where the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look significant, even the ordinary things, even the gravel paths and the stone walls and the courier carts coming and going with their sealed bags. She gave her name to the guard, who had seen it enough times now to smile slightly when he wrote it down. She walked in. Philip met her, as always, but he walked with her only to the inner corridor, where he said, "He has cleared the morning. It is just the 2 of you." He handed her the signed confirmation of the final recommendation, the official document that represented the closing of the formal process. "Congratulations," he said, with the quiet genuineness of a man who does not use that word often. She walked to the study. The door was open. She stepped in. Aldrich was not at the window. He was at his desk, and he was writing. And when she came in, he set the pen down in the middle of a sentence exactly as he had done the first time she came in person, with the particular ease of someone who has already decided that the thing in front of him matters more than the sentence. She placed the signed confirmation on the desk between them. She did not say anything about it because nothing needed to be said. It was there. It was real. It carried the language of the formal process, and the formal record, and all the patience and work that had moved it from 12 years of nothing to this piece of paper on this desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "It is done," he said. "This part of it," she said. "Yes," he said. "The practical parts will take time. The boundary restoration, The formal transfer of the timber rights, the documentation. It will run through the autumn. Dorothy knows the process, Esme said. She does, he agreed. She sat down without being asked, the first time she had done that. She noticed, from his expression, that he noticed. The pack is planting the eastern farmland, she said. The first season they have put anything in that ground in 9 years. 4 families are living on it already under the temporary rights. Good, he said, and meant it entirely. She looked at the window. The garden was full summer now, no longer the cautious green of early season but the heavy, confident green of a thing that has made up its mind and is not reconsidering. She had watched it change through this window over the last several months. She had a specific memory of each stage. I have been thinking, she said, about what comes after the formal representative standing is concluded. He was very still. Dorothy can handle the legal process through the autumn, she said. Clara Field's team will supervise it. Philip's office has everything that is needed. She looked at him. The pact does not require a formal representative for the remainder of the land process. No, he said. So the standing, in its formal sense, is finished, she said. Yes, he said. You said, she said, that standing can be renewed. For other matters, pacts of this size often have ongoing representation needs. He held her gaze. I said that, he said. And you meant it as a formal description. And as something else, he said. He did not look away. I have not been subtle about the something else, in the ways available to me. No, she said. You have not. She reached into her bag. She took out the mask. She set it on the desk between them, next to the signed confirmation. These 2 things, one official and one not, sitting side by side on the desk of the king who had opened a land inquiry and kept a broken mask for 6 months and cleared a morning. He looked at the mask. I should not have kept it, he said, strictly speaking. Strictly speaking, she agreed. I did not want to send it back, he said. I know, she said. I did not know at the time how to distinguish between not wanting to send it back for a sensible reason and not wanting to send it back for a different kind of reason. And now, she said. He picked up the mask. He held it the way she had held it in the study, that day, turning it over, looking at the inside, at the worn, smooth place where it had pressed against a face in a crowded room, while she had watched and thought and felt, on some level she had not yet fully acknowledged, that something was changing. It is a good mask, he said again. You keep saying that, she said. Because it is true, he said. You made it from materials you could find, in the time you had, for the purpose you had, and it worked. Everything it needed to do, it did. He looked at her. That is most of what I know about you, from the beginning, that you do the work with what you have and it holds. She looked at him. And that is the different kind of reason? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, among other things. She thought about Gideon Cole and the space between what things meant on paper and what they meant in practice, and the gap between those 2 things that could only ever be crossed by someone willing to stand in it. She thought about a borrowed gown and a wax seal and a gate she had walked through not knowing what was on the other side. She thought about the fact that she was not afraid of the right things. I am going back to the pack, she said, to plant the eastern farmland and prepare the documentation for the autumn process and continue teaching Dorothy's land law class, which I have now been attending as a student, even though I was the one who suggested it. She watched his face. And when the summer work is done, and the autumn process is underway, and the practical parts are in the hands that are best suited to hold them. She stopped. He waited. The representation standing, she said. You offered to renew it. I did, he said. Renew it, she said. Not for the land process, for whatever is next. I do not know what that looks like yet, and I suspect you do not either. And that is, she breathed, that is something I have decided not to be afraid of. He held her gaze and she held his, across the desk with the signed confirmation and the broken gold mask between them, 2 people who dealt in precision and exact words and had arrived at a place where the exact words were, this, whatever this is, the thing that does not have a document yet. Renew it, he said. She nodded. She stood, he stood. She picked up the mask. She did not put it back in her bag. She held it at her side by the cracked wing, and looked at him across the morning light of a room where a great deal of real work had been done, and a few real things had been said and not said, and the line between those 2 categories had grown interestingly unclear. The autumn, she said. The autumn, he agreed. She walked to the door. Esme Croft, he said. She paused. The paintings in the East Gallery, he said. The dark ones. I would like to show you the rest of them when you return. There are 7 in the back section that are not visible from the main room. She turned her head just slightly. Not all the way. 7 more, she said. The same painter, he said. Same valley. Different weathers. She was quiet for a moment. The morning light came through the window and lay across the floor in a long, unhurried rectangle. I would like that, she said. She left. Philip Ash was in the corridor. He looked at her face and then looked at the wall in the professional way of a man who has learned that some things are not his to comment on. She walked through the inner corridor and into the courtyard and out through the front gate. She rode home in the summer morning, on roads that were dry and warm and edged with the full green of a season that had decided to stay. The pack would plant the eastern farmland. Dorothy would teach her class. The formal process would move through its autumn stages. The record would say what it said now, that the Colford pack was real, their history was real, their land was real, and someone had finally looked up from the documents long enough to see it. Gideon Cole was not there to see this. She thought about him as she rode. The 4th drawer of the filing cabinet, stuck for years, holding 63-year-old maps that turned out to be the strongest thing in the file. He had kept everything. He had believed in paper. He had sent the fastest thinker he had on a mission that was about a letter, and also, it turned out, about everything that came after the letter. She thought about a man who said, "We tried." She thought about what trying had produced. The mask sat in her saddlebag. She could feel its slight weight against her side, familiar now, a broken thing she had made herself, that had held when it needed to hold and cracked only when she was already through the door, already outside, already free. Some things are like that. You make them from what you have, in the time you have, for the purpose in front of you, and they work. And afterward you look at them and see the cracks and the worn places and the beads that caught the light exactly right, and you understand that none of those things are separate from each other. They are all the same object. She rode. The road home was 2 hours in summer, and she took it steadily, the way you take things when you have learned that steady is not the same as slow. It is just the pace that holds. The autumn passed in the way the legal team had predicted, which was useful to know even though living through it was less orderly than the prediction. There were 4 formal visits to the palace, as Clara Field had outlined, and also 2 additional ones that were not in the plan. Once when Hartley's team filed a last-minute challenge to the land use rights that needed immediate response, and once when a question about the original survey markers required a direct sign-off that could not go through the mail. Esme made all 6 visits. She rode in rain twice. She spent one night in the city rather than make the return journey in the dark, which Dorothy had insisted on and which turned out to be the right call. On her 3rd autumn visit, she went back to the East Gallery. It was not part of the formal agenda. The morning's work had finished at noon, and Philip had walked her out as usual, and at the point where the corridor split, she had stopped and said, "I would like to see the 7 paintings." Philip had looked at her with his careful face. "I will let him know," Philip had said. He had come back 3 minutes later and said the gallery was available, which was his way of saying what it actually meant, which was that she was not going alone. They walked through the east corridor together, she and Aldrich, in the early afternoon, with the working day's files still in her bag and ink on her right hand from the morning's signatures. He pointed out the 7 paintings in the back section, which were hung in a lower row and slightly further apart than the others, as though the painter himself had known they needed a little more room to breathe. They were different from the 11 in the main gallery. Darker, not in tone but in their focus, where the main paintings showed hills and sky in their broad shapes. These 7 were close studies. A single tree in weather, a stone wall in 3 kinds of rain, a stretch of path at different hours of the same day, so that you could almost hear the time moving in them. She stood in front of each one for a long moment. He stood beside her. They were found after his death, Aldrich said, in the back room of the house in the valley. His estate had catalogued them as unfinished, but the art reviewer the Crown sent determined they were not unfinished. They were just smaller. A different kind of completed. She looked at the 3rd one. The stone wall. 3 different rains, visible in 3 different sections of the same image, as though the painter had worked on it across 3 separate days and had not tried to make them match. He knew they would not be understood, she said. Probably, Aldrich said. And he made them anyway. He made 700 paintings of the same hills, Aldrich said. He was not making them to be understood. She turned from the painting and looked at him. What was he making them for, she said. He met her eyes. For himself, he said, and for whoever came later who could see what he was doing. The gallery was quiet. The afternoon light had shifted since her first visit here. It came from a different angle in the autumn. lower and slightly golden, and it moved across the paintings differently than the summer light had, showing the texture of the paint in a way she had not seen before. She looked at the broken mask. She had brought it. It was in her bag, wrapped in the cloth she used for the maps when she transported them. She had not planned to bring it, or had told herself she had not planned to. She had packed it that morning, and had not unpacked it, and had carried it 2 hours on a horse. She reached into the bag. She took out the mask. She held it in both hands, the way you hold something you have been carrying for a long time. He looked at it. "I brought it back," she said. "I see that," he said. "I am not sure why," she said, which was not quite true, but was true enough. He did not say, "I know why." He did not say, "I expected this." He said nothing, which was the right thing to say, because the moment did not need managing. It just needed to be in the room. She turned the mask over in her hands, the cracked wing, the glass beads, the paint that had held its warmth through 6 months of being on a shelf and in a saddlebag and in a desk drawer and back in a saddlebag. "I made it to look good in candlelight," she said. "It did," he said. "I did not make it to last this long," she said. "It lasted anyway," he said. She looked at him. "Some things do that," she said. He held her gaze. The light moved across the paintings behind him. The old dark hills in different weathers, the same valley 700 times and then 7 more, the small figures in the distance that the painter had kept adding, even when the landscape did not require them. "Yes," he said, "some things do." She held the mask for another moment. Then she put it back in her bag, not because she was done with the conversation, but because the conversation was going to continue, and the mask had said what it needed to say by being present, and now it could be put away. "The autumn process," she said. "Nearly finished," he said. "2 more visits," she said. "Clara thinks before the end of the month." "She is usually right," he said. "And then," she said. He looked at her. "The renewal," she said. "Of the standing, for whatever comes after the land process." "Yes," he said. "I am not a court person," she said again. She said it not as a warning this time, but as a fact she was placing on the table between them for both of them to look at clearly. "I live 2 hours from here on a horse. I have a pack of 40 people and a stiff-drawered filing cabinet full of 60-year-old maps, and a woman named Dorothy, who is teaching land law, and a woman named Helen, who is growing things in field. She has not been able to grow things in for 9 years. "I know," he said. "And you are the king," she said. "Also known," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "The renewal," she said. "The renewal," he said. "For whatever comes after." She nodded. She picked up her bag. He walked with her through the gallery and out into the east corridor, and they walked together to the point where the corridor split, and she turned toward the front gate, and he stopped. "The winter," he said. She turned. "The formal process is mostly done by winter," he said. "The riding is harder in winter." "I have ridden in winter before," she said. "I know," he said. "But there are rooms in the East Wing that are not used between November and March, and which could be made available to a formal representative who needed to stay in the city for periods of the process, rather than making the ride in all weather." She was quiet. "That is a very formal way," she said again, "to say something." "I am working on being less formal about it," he said. She looked at him. The afternoon light in the corridor was the same low golden angle as in the gallery, and he was standing in it with the patience of a man who had made a decision and was waiting to see what the decision led to, which was, she thought, exactly the quality Gideon had identified when he said, "The one you can reason with." Not the one who was easy, the one who was worth it. "Work on it," she said. She turned and walked to the gate. Behind her, she heard him say nothing, which was the sound of a person who has received what they needed from a conversation and does not need to fill the silence after. She walked out. Philip was near the gate, as he always was. He said goodbye in his usual brief way. She said goodbye back. She rode home. The sky was the high, clear blue of autumn afternoons, and the road was dry, and the fields on either side had the worked, finished look of land that has given what it had for the season and is now at rest. She passed the boundary marker on the approach to the pack's land and slowed her horse to a walk, the way she always did now, looking at the cleared eastern farmland and the field shelter and the green things still growing along the sheltered edges where the frost had not reached yet. She thought about rooms in the East Wing between November and March. She thought about 7 more paintings of the same valley. She thought about a king who cleared mornings and kept broken things in desk drawers and stood at windows before conversations. who was working on being less formal, which she suspected would be a project of some duration and which she found, turning the thought over in the late afternoon light, something closer to looking forward to than she had expected to feel about anything in a long time. The pack would be well, the land was real, the record said so. And the rest of it, the other real thing, the one without documents, was not nothing. It was, in fact, a beginning. She wrote on. The evening came in around her slowly, the sky shifting from blue to the colors that come before dark, and the air cooling, and the lights coming on in the houses she passed, the warm yellow of lamps in windows, one by one, as people came in from their days and settled into the smaller, quieter hours. She was home before the first stars. She turned her horse into the stable. She put the mask back on the shelf. She looked at it for a moment. Gold paint, glass beads, cracked wing, worn smooth on the inside where it had pressed against her face through everything it had needed to hold through. She had made it from what she had. It had done what it needed to do. That was enough. That was, she thought, looking at it in the lamplight, more than enough. She turned and went to make something to eat, and outside the window the first stars were arriving, and the pack's eastern farmland was planted and real and growing things again at last. And somewhere 2 hours north on a horse, in a palace on a hill above a city, a man was in his study with the lamp on and the left side of his desk, and all the things that were not finished. She ate. She would write him a letter in the morning. Not a formal one. Just a letter,